Today, I'll be teaching you JavaScript by walking you through 5 projects. These projects will get progressively more difficult and cover more and more JavaScript features. Now, this video is designed for complete beginners. At the start of the video, I'll show you how to set up your environment, get your code running, and start working with JavaScript if you've never used it before. Each project will get more and more difficult, and we'll learn about more JavaScript features, and the 5 projects we'll be building are as follows. The first will be a choose your own adventure game. The second will be a text-based calculator. The third will be a contact management system. Then we'll build tic-tac-toe or X's and O's. And finally, we'll build an automated quiz generator and grader. This video is great for beginners because not only will you learn JavaScript, but you'll be able to apply your knowledge instantly into a project so you can see how you use these features in the real world. With that said, let's get into the video and learn JavaScript through 5 projects. Now, by the way, for this video, it doesn't matter whether you're using Windows, Mac, or Linux, but you'll notice that I'm using my Mac, which like me, works hard and rarely gets a break. Now, our Mac needs a break too, and that's where the sponsor of today's video, Clean My Mac X, comes in. While you're relaxing on vacation, Clean My Mac X gives your Mac a Mac-cation. It clears out junk and malware, keeping your Mac fast, secure, and organized. The menu app acts as your Mac's personal assistant, showing you everything from battery health to available storage. The battery monitor checks how much power you've got left, the memory monitor identifies apps slowing you down, and the CPU monitor ensures your Mac doesn't overheat. Plus, Moonlock Engine protects against malware. So whether you're on vacation or dealing with post-holiday catch-up, Clean My Mac X keeps your Mac running smoothly. Give your Mac the vacation it deserves and check out the link in the description for a 7-day free trial and use my promo code TechWithTim for 20% off. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. Now, the first step here is going to be to set up our environment to write JavaScript code. Now, if you've already done this and you have an editor and you know how to run and execute your code, then skip forward to the timestamp I'll put on screen, or if it's not there, you can go down in the video player and you'll see where all of the different projects start. This section is for people that are really complete beginners that have never done this before and need to set up their computer. So in order to write JavaScript code, the first thing we need is a code editor. Now we're going to be using VS Code or Visual Studio Code. It goes by both names, and we're just going to download that. Now it's completely free, and you can do that by simply clicking the link in the description or going to code.visualstudio.com. You can see I'm on the page here. From here, you're just going to download it for the appropriate operating system and then run through the installer. Usually that will be in your downloads folder. Next, we're going to go and download Node.js. Now, there's multiple ways to run JavaScript code, but for this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do this just plainly in your terminal. So you don't need to know HTML, you don't need to deal with CSS, and you can just very simply run your JavaScript code from the terminal. So to do that, we need Node.js. So again, go to this website and just download the latest version of Node.js. Again, run through that installer, and if in the installation process, it asks you if you want to add this to the path, then go ahead and press yes. So again, if it asks you to add to path, then press yes. Okay, that's it. Visual Studio Code and Node.js. The next step is going to be to open VS Code. So you can do that from the Spotlight search up here, just typing VS Code or Visual Studio Code. Then on Windows, you could do that from like the Windows search bar. Okay, so let's open up VS Code. Let me zoom in a little bit so you guys can actually see this. And your window might look a little bit different than this, but what we want to do is we want to open up a folder. So you can actually close this welcome tab if you see that. And this is now the code editor where we're going to write and execute our code. So just like we would write something in Microsoft Word if we were writing an essay, for code, we're going to do that in VS Code. Okay, so we need to open up a folder. Now there's many ways to do this. The first is to click on these documents up on the top left-hand corner, which is your Explorer. When you do that, you should see something that says Open Folder. If you don't see that, you can go up to the top bar here. It might be hidden for you. And then File, Open Folder. Okay, so we're going to go to Open Folder. And this is the first step I usually do whenever I'm working on a project. So I'm going to go New Folder, and I'm going to make a new folder called JavaScript Tutorial. Now you can name this whatever you want, but just make a new folder and press on create, and then go ahead and click on open. So at this point, you're probably going to see something that looks similar to this. Again, it might be a little bit different because I have some extensions and stuff in VS Code. We're going to click on the X here from the welcome, and we're going to press on this new file button. So now that we've opened the folder, you can kind of see the name of the folders right here. We can make a new file by pressing on this button, or we can go to File and then New File. So we're going to make a new file here, and we're just going to call this tutorial and then .js. Okay, so you can name this anything that you want, but I recommend that you don't include any spaces in the name and make sure that it ends in .js. .js stands for JavaScript, and you'll notice we're getting the little JavaScript logo popping up here, indicating that we are writing in JavaScript. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and press enter and make that new file. To open the file, you can just double press on it here, but it should open by default. If you close the file, you can open it again by just clicking on it. Okay, so here is where we're going to write our JavaScript code. Now we're going to write a really simple kind of a test line of code per se, just to see if we can execute this before we move on to the next step. So we're going to write the following: console.log, and then just hello or hello world. This is usually the first thing you write whenever you're learning a new programming language, and it's just kind of a test like output, so you can make sure that your code is actually working. Okay, so we're going to do console.log hello world, and notice that I get this little white dot appearing near my file name. Now what that actually tells me is I haven't yet saved the file. So what we need to do if we want to run the code is we need to save it. So anytime you make a change, you need to save the file, and then when you execute it, the new change will kind of be applied. So if you're wondering like, why am I writing stuff and nothing's happening? It's probably because you forgot to save the file. It's the most common error that almost every beginner runs into. Now there's a lot of ways to save the file. You can go up here to the file menu and press on save, or you can hit Control S or Command S on your keyboard, which is what you'll see me doing all the time. So Control S or Command S depending on your operating system. Okay, so now we've saved the file. We don't see that little white dot. And what we're going to do is open up the terminal. Now, if you just put your mouse down to the bottom of the screen here, you'll see that you get a little up arrow, and you can drag a terminal like this. Now, another way to open that is to use Command and then the back tick, but you probably don't know where that is, so you can just open it like this, okay? So you're going to open up the terminal. Now, from here, this is where we can execute our JavaScript code. So in order to do that, we're going to type node and then the name of our file. Now, the name of our file should be this, right? So we're going to say tutorial.js, and we're going to try to execute the code. Okay, now when I do that, notice that we get the output hello world. Now, obviously, change this file to be whatever you named your file. Make sure that this looks exactly as you see it here and that you're typing it like this. If you're getting some weird errors, you can destroy the terminal by hitting on the trash and then just drag this up again, and it will give you a new terminal instance. Okay. Hopefully that's clear. I know I'm going really slow, but a lot of people have issues with this, and I want to make sure that this is covered for everyone and you know how to execute the code. Just for reference, if I were to make a file like 1.js and I wanted to execute that, I would now need to change this to say node and then 1.js. Now notice when I execute this, nothing happens though, because I haven't done anything in my file, so it's executing it, but we just don't see any output, okay? If you want to delete a file, you can click on it and press on delete. Okay, so that's pretty much it in terms of running your code. Now that we've done that, we're going to move on to project number 1, which is our choose your own adventure game. All right, so we're diving into the first project here, which is a choose your own adventure game. Now, a choose your own adventure game allows the users to kind of direct themselves through kind of a maze or a puzzle. And you might have seen this before if you've read certain books where it's like, you know, if you want to go left, turn to page 73. And then it says, if you decide to swim across the river, turn to page 35. And there's just all these different decisions and kind of like a branching route or path that you can go down. That's what we're going to build here. So the idea is you might start by saying, hey, do you want to choose a sword or an axe? Do you want to go left or right? Do you want to cross the bridge? Do you want to go across the water? And there's one path that's correct and will lead you to kind of win the game, and the rest of them will eventually terminate because you chose the wrong option. Okay, so let's build that. However, there is a few things we need to learn kind of to start, because if you don't know anything about coding or JavaScript, well, you know, there's a bit of a foundation we need before we can build that project. Okay, so whenever we write code, you saw that we have the ability to actually output something to the terminal. Now that's what this is right here, console.log. In other languages, in Python, for example, it's print. In some languages, it's, you know, system.out, but in JavaScript, it's console.log. So whenever you want something to go to the terminal, you actually want to see some results or some output, you use console.log, and then you put these two sets of parentheses. And inside of these sets of parentheses, you put a double quotation mark, so a set of them, so an opening one and a closing one, and then anything that you want to type out. Now you already saw this, but I'm just going through it slowly because it's really important. Now notice that we can't have like extra spaces here. I can't have, missing the period. Like if you do anything wrong at all, even having like a capital here for log, you're gonna get an error in your code. So you wanna make sure that you do everything exactly as I show you in this video, because especially when we're coding, all of the characters are very particular. And I know it seems silly, especially if you come from something like Microsoft Word or when you're writing an essay where you can have different capitalization, etc. Here, it's really, really specific. Now, just to show you what happens, let's say I do something like console dot and then I accidentally put 2 L's. So I make a mistake. Then I save my code and I decide to run it. So again, I can bring up my terminal and I can type node and then tutorial.js. You're going to see that I get this kind of error message. It says console.llog is not a function. Now you might not know exactly what these mean, but always try to kind of read through the result that you're seeing here. All of this is gibberish, but mostly like the main line underneath here that's in white, because it can sometimes give you a hint to what you've done wrong. So if you're getting an issue, kind of check through this response here, and you'll see that it actually tells me JS line 1, so the colon, and then the number here is what line this issue occurred on. So that kind of helps you. Line 1, and then you can see that I have 2 L's. So it's kind of pointing to the mistake, and then you should be able to figure out, oh, I put 2 L's, I just need 1. So let's fix that, and then let's run it again, and there we go, we get hello world. Okay, I'm just going slowly here, just trying to help you get through this, because if you're a beginner, there's a lot of errors you potentially will run into, and that's totally fine. That's going to happen even for me. I just want to help you be able to solve them. Okay, so that's logging something to the terminal. Now, the next thing we need to cover is something known as data types. Now, whenever we write code, we're dealing with different pieces of data, and that data has classifications or types, and there's a few important ones you need to understand in JavaScript. So the first type that we have is a string, and that's anything surrounded in double or single quotation marks. So something like hello or hello, all of these are strings, okay? And a string, again, is anything in double or single quotation marks. There's a few more advanced types as well, but these are the ones you need to be aware of. And you can type literally anything you want inside of these quotation marks. So whenever you see a set of double or single quotes, that means you're working with a string, which again is just a set of a bunch of different characters. And that's what we use here when we want to log something, we put a string. Even the number like 1 here, this is a string because it's surrounded by quotation marks. Now, the next type that we have in JavaScript is the number type. Now, the number type is anything that is a number. So something like 23. Notice it's highlighting in purple. That's a number. Something like 23.5, 23.58, something like -9, 0, 0 point, a bunch of different values. All of these are numbers, okay? So that's another important type to understand. The next type we have is Boolean. Now, Boolean is simply true or false. That's it. And notice that it's typed exactly like this. Okay, so with a lowercase t and a lowercase f, this is true or false, or the Boolean values. If you're familiar with computers and binary, true would be 1 and false would be 0. If that means nothing to you, ignore that I said that. Okay, and there's a few other types we want to be aware of. Another type that we have is undefined. Again, notice it kind of highlights in a certain color here because this is a reserved keyword in JavaScript, which means it's like a type, okay? So we have undefined. This is a type of itself, and it means when something is undefined, when we don't yet know what it is. And then we have null. Now, null is a different type, and this is used when you explicitly want to set something to be kind of empty or non-existent. So undefined means we don't know what it is, doesn't exist, and null is indicating, hey, this thing is empty, it's, non-existent. We are just explicitly, like, we're making sure that it's known that we're setting this to nothing. I know it seems a little bit weird, but those are types that you might see, so you just want to be aware of them. Now, we also have another type, which is known as an object. We can look at that later, but yeah, just something to be aware of. Okay, so main types for now, just a quick recap. We have strings, anything in single or double quotes. Then we have our numbers, so anything like this is a number. Then we have our Booleans, which are true or false. Then we have our, what was next, our undefined type. So undefined is just simply undefined itself, like the type of undefined is undefined. I know that's a bit confusing, but that's what it is. And then null, same thing, like the type of null is null. So just that one keyword. Okay, so now that we've looked at our data types, let's look at how we store this data and how we interact with it in our program. So just like in math class, when we program, we have variables. And variables, you can really just think of them like buckets that store some value. So in order to make a variable in JavaScript, we have three different options. The first and most flexible option is to use the var keyword. So what I can do is say var, and then I can give my variable a name. So just something like maybe variable, or X, or Tim, or name, or whatever you want to call it. But usually it's a good idea to name your variable something that kind of makes sense with what it's storing. So let's go with var name. Now what we can do is put an equal sign here, and then we can assign a value to this variable. That just means that we'll give this variable something to hold or to store. So I'm going to say var name is equal to Tim. Now when I do this, all I'm saying is I'm making a new variable indicated by this var keyword. The name of the variable is name, so maybe let's just change this to X so it's a bit more clear. So the name of this variable is X. We're using an equal sign, which says, hey, we're going to assign something to this. And then we indicate Tim here, which is saying, hey, the variable X is going to be equal to Tim. Now what that also means is that this variable here, we can say that it's of type string. So notice when I hover over it, it's kind of giving me this little line here, and it's indicating that X is holding a string, and that's because the type that's inside of it, the data that we're storing, well, its data type is a string. Okay, so that's the first way that we declare a variable, and if we wanted to access the variable and use it, we could write something like console.log, and then we can just put X here. Now, when I use X, I'm referencing this variable that I just created. And since this variable stores Tim, if we run our code, we'll see that this will print out Tim. Okay, so that is the first little thing that we can understand. We have var X equals Tim. This is how we create a variable. And by the way, now that I've defined this variable, it's been created. If I want to change it later on, I don't need to use the var keyword again. I can just say X is equal to, and then I can go with something like John. And if we run this now, you'll see that now the variable has been changed to John. Okay, so this here is known as our initialization. We've initialized the variable, we've given it a value, in this case it's Tim. Now that this variable exists, if we want to change it, we can just do something like X equals John, and if we want to use it or access it, we can just refer to it by its name. Now if I tried to access a variable like Y, which doesn't yet exist because we haven't created this, if I go here, and I print out, you'll see that we get an issue. It says reference error, Y is not defined. Now it's saying that because there's no variable with the name Y. Okay, just wanted to quickly show that to you because that's something that you might get. Okay, so that's variables. There's a few more things to go over there. Now, when you name a variable, there's a few rules. For example, it's not okay to have something like a space. So if I have name space 2, or let's just go with 2 like this, you'll notice that it's giving us an error with this kind of red underline. The reason for that is you can't use a space in a variable name. If you wanted to have a variable that was multiple words, you would need to use an underscore. Okay, so an underscore is a valid character, and you're also allowed to use numbers in your variable name. So if I wanted to, I could do name underscore 2, or I could do name 2 like that. But really, when we write code in JavaScript, the way that we typically separate multiple words is using something known as camel case. So if I wanted it to be name 2, I would do name, and then I put a capital for this. So name 2 like this. Just kind of a common convention. Doesn't really matter if you use an underscore or not, but a lot of people in JavaScript, you'll notice they kind of write their variables like this. Now, a few more rules. You can't have all these special characters. If you try to add, parentheses or ampersands or dollar signs and stuff, that's not going to work. And you also can't start the variable with a number. So if I do something like to name, that's going to be an issue. We can use a number, but it just can't be the first character. Okay, so keep that in mind with your variable names. Now, another thing that's important is that our variable names are case sensitive. That means that the variable name2 is different than the variable name2. Okay, so make sure you're checking your capitalization because it is case sensitive and you need to make sure you have the same capitalization when you're using variables. Okay, so that is the first way to make a variable. Now, really what's typically preferred in JavaScript is actually rather than using the var keyword to use the let keyword. Now, when you use the let keyword, you're doing the exact same thing that you just did with var, except you're indicating that this variable here can be changed later on in the program. Now, I don't really want to explain the difference between var and let because that's a bit more advanced than we need to get into in this video, but just know that there is this let keyword. This is the way we'll typically define variables. And when we let something be equal to some value, we're indicating that it can change later on. Okay, now there's another one that we can use here, and this is known as const. Now, const here stands for constant. And when we define a variable using constant, by the way, all three things you just saw here, they're all variables, just different types of variables. That means that we can't change this variable later on. So if I try to do something like name2 is equal to 5, I try to change its value, and I go up here and I run the code, you see that we get an error and it says assignment to a constant variable because we can't change that. That's what const means. So whenever you're defining something that's not going to change, which can happen quite a bit, you use const or constant. And if you're defining something that will change later on, you can use let. Okay, there's a lot more things with variables, but that is really all you need to know in order for us to get started with the project here. Okay, so now that we understand variables, we understand data types, it's time to talk about collecting user input. So sure, it's great to be able to print things out like, hi, how are you, whatever, hello world, but oftentimes we want to respond to what the user's saying. Now, unfortunately, in JavaScript, it's a little bit tricky to grab user input, but I'm going to show you kind of a trick that can allow us to get it a bit easier. So what we're going to do is open up our terminal here, and we're going to write the following command. So bear with me here. So the command we're going to type here is npm install and then prompt-sync, okay? Now this will install the code that we need in order to collect user input. Just bear with me, I understand it's a bit confusing, but this is what we need to do. Okay, so that's going to install the package for us. By the way, if you want to get rid of whatever's in the terminal, you can type clear, or if you're on Windows, you can type CLS, and that'll get rid of all that. So I'm going to remove that from now and just make that a bit smaller. And now we're going to start using this. Now to use this, I'm going to say const prompt is equal to require, and then prompt-sync, and then we're going to put another set of parentheses. Now I know I'm going fast, but you can pause the video if you want to type it all out. I'm also going to explain what this is doing. So we're saying const, which means constant, right? So we're defining a variable called prompt. Now prompt is going to be equal to require prompt-sync, and then we have to call this. I know it seems weird, but this is just how you bring in this code, okay? So this is code someone else has written that's going to allow us to really easily collect input from the user. Now we want to test this out to make sure it's working. So we can type prompt, a set of parentheses, and then we can type a question that we want to ask the user. So something like, what is your name, question mark. Okay, then I'm going to do a space. Now, what I'm able to do now is I'm able to have this printed to the terminal, so down here, and then afterwards, so after this string here, it's going to allow the user to start typing. Now that's why I've put this space here so that there's what they type is not going to be kind of squished in with this. And prompt itself is just the name of the variable that we define. So if we called this something like, HE, then we would have to change this to HE. Okay, so that's how we're using this. Hopefully that's makes sense a bit or isn't too confusing. I hate how it's so complicated in Node.js and Python to collect user input, but it's just how it is. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is run the code to test this. We're going to do node tutorial.js. Now notice it says, what's your name? And it hasn't finished the program yet. We actually get our cursor here. And now that I can start typing, so I'm going to type Tim and then hit enter. Okay, perfect. So prompt is working. Now, obviously that's great, but we probably want to be able to store what the user types so that we can maybe print it out or we can use it in some meaningful way. So let's do that. We're going to say const name is equal to, and then this right here. Now what's going to happen now is whatever the user types in is going to get stored in this variable name. So I'm going to save that, and then we're able to use the variable. So if I wanted to, I could say console.log and then name. Okay, so now I'm going to run my code. So let's clear and run, and we're going to go with Tim, and it says Tim. Okay, so now we've collected what they typed, and now we're printing it out. Perfect. Now the next step after this is we probably want to say something like hello, whatever their name is, like give them some kind of greeting that's customized with what they typed in. So let me show you how that works. What I can do here is I can put something like hello, and then I can put a comma, and then I can put the name, and I can say, how are you, question mark. Now what I'm able to do is I'm able to print multiple messages or multiple strings. So I can say console.log, and then I'm going to print out hello. Then I've put a comma, and then I put the next thing I want to print, which is Tim, or whatever the name is that the user types in. Then I put another comma, and then I put how are you. Now it's going to print all of these things that I've separated with commas, and it's going to separate them with a space. So if I run this now and we type in, let's go with something different like Joey, it says, hello, Joey, how are you? Okay, so you can print multiple things using the comma to separate them inside of a console.log. Now, another option is we can actually what's known as concatenate these strings together. So let's say maybe we didn't want to have this space. I can use a plus sign instead. And when we use the plus sign with different strings, because remember, this is a string, the name, whatever the user typed in, is going to be a string. And then this is a string. We just squish the strings together. So if I run this and I go Tim, it says, hello, Tim, how are you? And actually, you know what? This is a good learning moment. Notice that we're getting the same result as before, and it's not squishing the values together. The reason for that is I see this white dot here, and I forgot to save my file before I ran it. So let me save this and run it again. And now you'll see if I type in Tim, we get the results squished together. So if you're ever you're not getting, whatever change you made, just check if you saved the file or not. Even me, all the time, I forget to do that. Okay, so now we're able to greet the user. So let's just change this back. So we're using the commas, so there's a bit of space. And the next thing we want to do is we want to start working on our game. So we're going to say, hello, how are you? And maybe rather than how are you, you can say something like, do you want to play? Or maybe actually, let's welcome them to the game. Hello, Tim. Welcome to our game. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's ask them another question. So I'm going to say, const should we play is equal to prompt, and then we're going to ask the user if they want to play. So we're going to say, do you want to play, question mark. Okay, so now I'm going to ask them, and I'm going to put a space here so they can type something. And what we'll do after this is we'll check if they typed yes or no. And if they typed yes, then we'll start the game. If they type no, then we will obviously not start the game. Now, I know I'm going really slow, guys, but I'm just trying to make this really accessible for everyone. So if it's too slow for you, feel free to fast forward in the video or to increase the playback speed. And don't worry, for the future projects, it will be a lot faster. And all the stuff we already covered, I'm just going to quickly go over. Okay. So now we're asking them if we should play. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run the code and test this out. Okay, so let's run this, and we're going to type in Tim, and we get, what is your name? Hello, Tim. Welcome to our game. Do you want to play? And then we can type something like yes. Okay, so that's great, but obviously now we need to check what they typed in. And if they type yes, we need to start playing. Otherwise, we need to, stop playing or tell them, too bad, you missed out on the opportunity. So to do that, we're now gonna learn about conditions. Now, whenever we're working with code, we have ways that we can compare different values together. Now, in this case, we wanna check if what the user typed in is equal to, in this case, yes, but we could check anything that we want. And we do that using some comparison operators. Now in JavaScript, we have the following operators. We have double equal sign, a triple equal sign, a not equal to, a not, and then double equal sign. We have a less than, a greater than, a less than or equal to, and a greater than or equal to. There's a few other ones that are kind of, less used, but these are the common ones. Now you'll notice we're getting kind of all of these red lines. So what I'm going to do now is introduce a comment. Now, a comment is simply a way that we can write something in our code that the execution will ignore. So right now, if I were to try to run the code, we'd get an error because I have all of these symbols that just don't make sense to kind of what's known as the compiler or the interpreter. We don't need to get into that, but that's what's running the code. But if I want it to ignore that, I can simply do a double slash. Now, when I do a double slash, it's going to make this line gray or comment out the line. And that means that now when we run the code, whatever's on this line will be ignored. So I could just do this on all of these lines, right? So that I have this comment and now the red line goes away and we're going to ignore these lines. Or I can do what's known as a multi-line comment. Now, a multi-line comment is a slash, an asterisk, and then you can end this with an asterisk and a slash. Now, when we do this, we can comment out multiple lines at once. So this whole part right here now is a comment which will be ignored when we run our code. Anyways, that's a comment. Okay, so let's go through these different operators and I'll show you quickly how they work. Now, the double equal sign is what's known as a loose comparison. And this means we're going to check two values and see if they're equal to the same thing, but we're not going to look at their type. So it's a little bit weird, but that means that we could do something like 7 is equal to 7. And now we're going to actually just check if these things kind of equate to the same value, but we're not going to be concerned with if their types are different. So in this case, the string 7 is different than the number 7, but since if we were to convert this here to this type, they're both the same, that means that this is actually going to return to us the value true. So whenever we use these different operators here, the result of an expression, so if we write something like this, is either going to be true or false. It's going to be Boolean, okay? Now this is referred to as a condition. So when we use an operator, so a conditional operator, and we use an operand, that's what these are called here, a left and right operand, this is going to give us a result or evaluate to true or false. Okay, so the double equal sign is a loose comparison, and I recommend that you don't use this because it can give you some weird results that you're not expecting. Now, I don't want to get into it too much, but again, remember, this will actually not really concern itself with the types and just check if these things are equal to each other without looking at the type. Okay, that's not a completely accurate explanation, but for you right now, that's what you need to know. You can look into it more if you continue learning JavaScript. Now, the next is the triple equal sign. This is the strict equality operator, and this will make sure that two things are exactly the same and the type does matter. So if I do something like Tim, or actually let's go back to the other example, something like 1 is equal to 1, whereas if we use two equal signs, this would be true. When we do this, we're going to get the result false. And that's because, yes, these are the same, but they are different types, so they're not the exact same, so we get false because this is a strict equality operator. There's some more examples I could go through here, but pretty much always use the triple equal sign unless you have a really good reason to use the double equal sign. Now, the not equal to works the same way, but in reverse. So if we do exclamation point and then equals to, this is the loose not equal to. Now, this checks if two things are not the same, and if they are not the same, it returns true. If they are the same, it returns false. Now, in this case, this will actually give us false. The reason for that is that these two things, if we checked them with the double equal sign, would be true. They would be the same. So when we do not equal to, it gives us false because it's the reverse of that. Whereas if we did not equal equal, then this would be true because these things are not the exact same when we consider their types, because one is a string and one is a number. Okay, so that's those four operators covered. We then have the less than sign. Now you can actually use this with mismatched types. So we have a string versus a number, but it's a bit confusing, so we don't need to look at that. But it pretty much just tells you if something is less than the other thing. So in this case, this would give you false because 4 is not less than 1. Whereas if we swap this to greater than, well, 4 is greater than 1, so we would get true. Then we have greater than or equal to. So if we did, 4 greater than or equal to 4, that would be true. If it was strictly greater than, this would be false because they're the same, okay? Then we have the less than or equal to. If I go 4 less than or equal to 5, of course, that would be true. If we change this to 6, then that would be false, okay? So those are our comparison operators. Now let's see how we can use those to see if we should play the game. So first, let's do the following. We're going to say const condition is equal to, and then I'm going to go with should we play is equal to, notice I'm using 3 equal signs, and then I'm going to say yes. Then I'm going to console.log the condition. Okay, now when I save my code and run, what's going to happen is we're going to print out true if we should play the game, and we're going to print out false if we should not. And we're going to do that by looking at what the user typed in, and we're going to take whatever they typed in, and we're going to compare that to the string yes. Now, if it's the exact same, then this will be true and we'll play. If it's anything different, it's going to be false. So let's go here and run our code. We're going to say, what is your name? Tim. Do you want to play? Yes, and we get true. Run this again. What is your name? Tim. Do you want to play? No, and we get false. And just for one more example, Tim, and if I type something like yes with a capital Y, it actually says false. And the reason for that is capitalization matters. So a yes with a lowercase y and a yes with an uppercase Y are different, so it gives us false. Now, if we wanted to avoid that, what we can actually do is we can take whatever the user typed in and we can convert this to a lowercase string. So I can say dot to and then lowercase and then put a set of parentheses. What this is known as is a method. You don't need to worry too much about the exact kind of naming here. But what that's going to do is it's going to act on this string, and it's going to kind of turn this string into a lowercase version and put that right here. So it won't actually change the string itself, but it will get whatever the lowercase version of that string is and kind of put that in place of the line you see right here. So if we type in something with uppercases, it will just convert them all to lowercases and then compare that to yes. So that way, if they type something that's yes, but with different capitalization, it will still work. So if I do this and I type Tim and then I type like YES, it says false, and that's because I forgot to save. So if I fix this and run it again and we go Tim and we go YES like that, it still says true. Okay, so sorry about that before, I just forgot to save, but you can see now it is working when we convert this to lowercase. Okay, so all of that is great, but now what we want to do is we want to say something to the user if they want to play the game. So how are we going to do that? Well, I've kind of hinted at it the way that I said that, but we're going to use something known as an if statement. Now, an if statement allows us to check if something is true. So that's where the conditions come in. So the syntax for an if statement, which is the way in which we write it, is the following. We write if, we write a set of parentheses, and we write a set of curly braces. Now, the parentheses here is where we put something that is true or false. So in this case, if I put my condition, this is going to be equal to true or false. So if this is true, we're going to do whatever's inside of these curly braces. So if I do something like console.log, okay, we will play, then what's going to happen is only if this condition evaluates to true will we print this out. Otherwise, we just won't print anything. So let's look at this now. We're going to go clear and run. We're going to go Tim and then yes. And notice it says, okay, we will play. If we run again, Tim and no, it doesn't say anything because this did not run. Okay, so that's it. That's the if statement. It's pretty straightforward. We say, if this thing is true, do whatever is inside of here. Now, there's one line here, but we could put multiple lines, and we will in fact do that in a minute. Now, one thing to note is that we don't need to kind of write it how we've written it like this. I can take this line, and I could paste that here and remove this. And this is perfectly valid. As long as whatever you have inside of here ends up being true or false, then it's going to allow us to kind of get inside of the if statement. Okay, so let's run it one more time and go Tim and then yes, and notice it still works. Okay, so you can do it in a variable or you can do it like this, how I've just done it. Now that's great, but we probably want to say something to the user if they don't want to play. So if they don't want to play, I'm going to put an else statement here. And an else statement is something that only comes after an if statement or as a part of kind of an if statement block. I can't just go down here and write an else statement. It needs to be associated with an if. Now the else is just the other side of the if. So if this thing is true, do this. Otherwise, or else, do this. It's pretty easy, but if I just go here and go console.log and then, okay, sad face. Now, if they don't type yes, then we're going to print this out. So if this is not true, go in here and do that. That's all that is. So let's look at this now. We're going to go Tim and then no. And it says, okay, sad face. Whereas if I type Tim and then yes, it says, okay, we will play. Okay, so that's the else. Now this is the basics on the if-else statement. But there's one more thing we need to look at, which is the else if. Okay. Now the else if works the exact same way as an if, but we only check it if this is not true. So it's kind of like a chain. We say, if this thing is true, do this, and then skip the rest. Otherwise, check this thing. Otherwise, do this. Okay? Now we can actually have multiple else ifs, but let's just look at an example of this. So let's say we have, should we play? Let's just copy this and put this here. And let's say that it's equal to no. Maybe we'll take the okay here and we'll put that inside of here. And then we'll change this to say invalid input, ... Okay, so we have console.log, okay, we'll play, okay, sad face, and invalid input. Now, the way this is going to work, is we're going to ask the user if they want to play. If they type in yes, we're going to execute this, and we're going to skip the rest of this. If they type in no, which I'm checking here, so if they didn't type in yes, we're going to check if this is the case. If they type in no, we're going to print this out, and we're going to skip this. Otherwise, so if none of this is true, we're going to print invalid input. I know I explained that a little bit weird. Also, it doesn't matter if you have a space or if you put this on the same line. It's valid either way. But let's run it and just test this out. Okay, so node, Tim, let's type in no, and notice we get okay. Let's type in maybe invalid or something like that, and it says invalid input. Okay, so again, if this thing is true, skip the rest of this. If it's not, check this next if statement. If that's not true, do this. And if we wanted to, we could have another else if. We can have as many else ifs as we want, but they just have to come after an if statement, okay? So in order to use the else if or the else, you need to start the block with an if statement. Now, as soon as we see the else, that kind of terminates this if statement block, which means I can't come here and do like else if now. That's invalid because the else was already placed. It always goes at the end of the statement, okay? Last thing, if I want to do another if statement, that's fine. I can do that down here and start a different block. Okay, so that's it. This is our if, and else. And now we actually want to start the game. We know enough to build this out now. So as a reminder, the way this game works is we're going to ask users questions, and based on the answer to their question, we're going to move down a different path, and eventually the user will either reach the end of the game or they'll reach a path where they're not able to complete the game or they lose. So this is the first thing we ask them, right? Do you want to play? Okay, yes, they want to play. Now, if they say yes, what we're going to do is remove this. And inside of this if statement is where we're going to write the logic for the game. So I'm going to say game logic here. Okay, because only if they typed yes are we going to execute kind of like the game code. Otherwise, we're going to handle this. Okay, so we're going to go inside of the game logic. And the first thing we're going to do is kind of think of what we want to ask the user to start. Now, I like a simple question like, do you want to go left or do you want to go right? And you can be as creative as you want with this, which is why I love this game. But I'm going to make it basic so you guys can extend it and make it really cool. So what we're going to do is the following. We're going to say const, and we're going to say left or right is equal to prompt. I'm going to say you enter a maze. Do you want to go left or right? Question mark. Okay, now let's make this a little bit smaller so you guys can read this. So now inside of here, I need to check what they typed in. So I'm going to say if left or right is equal to left, then I'm going to do something here. Otherwise, so if they didn't type left, I'm going to do something here. So you can see that we're going to kind of branch in here with multiple if statements. So I'm saying if left or right is equal to left, then maybe this was the right decision. So if it's the right decision, we can do something like console.log, you go left and see a bridge, ... Okay, and then we can ask them another question. So I can say const something like cross is equal to prompt, and I'm going to say, do you want to cross the bridge? Question mark. And then same thing, I'm going to say if cross is equal to yes, do this, if not, equal this. We'll keep going in a sec. I just want to slow down a little bit because I know I'm going a little bit fast. So again, if they want to play, we're going to ask them another question. Then for this question, well, we need to check what they answered. So if they said left, then this is like the correct choice. So we're saying, okay, you go left and you see a bridge. Otherwise, we're going to say console.log. We're going to say you go right and fall off a cliff. Okay, so a little bit aggressive, but you can see we're saying, okay, well, if you go left, well, you lose the game. That's the wrong decision, so you don't want to do that. So then they'd have to run the game again and try to go down the correct path. So here, now, if they go left, we're going to continue going because this is the correct decision. So we're going to say if cross is equal to, and again, you guys can make this whatever you want. I'm just showing you the layout of the game, is equal to yes. Then we can do something like console.log. And we're going to say you cross, but the bridge was weak and broke and you fell. My great English there. And we'll say you lost ... Okay. Otherwise, so if they don't want to cross, so if they type anything else pretty much, then we could continue the game. Or we could say something like console.log, good choice, ... you win. Let me just make this a bit larger so you can see. Now, obviously, you want to keep going and make this more creative. And you don't have to allow people to, die or lose at every avenue. If you wanted to, you could have both paths be valid paths. You also could get even more creative here, and you could have multiple options. So maybe you enter the maze. Do you want to go left, right, or straight? And then rather than left or right here, you would just have another else. So you do like this, else if. And then here you'd say else if left or right is equal to straight, then you would do something else here. So you can have multiple different options, right? So look at this code, kind of study it a little bit. I know it's a bit difficult to read, but the point is we have these branching paths, and the paths can get quite large, and you can have quite a complex game. I'm just showing you the basic layout of it for this tutorial. And I know I wrote a lot of code here, but all of the code you see on screen now you already understand because we already went through it, and we're just kind of laying this code out in different sections and different paths to create this game. So let's just run this one right now just to kind of make sure this is working. So we're going to say, what is your name? Tim. Hello, Tim, do you want to play? Yes. You enter a maze. Let's go left. You go left and see a bridge. Do you want to cross? No. Good choice. You win. Okay, let's do a different path this time. Let's go Tim. Yes. Let's go right. If we go right, you go right and fall off a cliff, right? So you can see based on prior decisions that we've made, that affects the game. So we can go Tim. Yes. Let's go left this time. And then let's cross the bridge this time. And it says you want to cross the bridge, cross, good choice, you win. Let's see, maybe I did this wrong. Oh, if cross equals yes, that's why. So if cross equals cross, that's what we should be checking. Do you want to cross the bridge? Oh, what did I type? Okay, no, this is correct. I just typed cross rather than yes. I don't know why I did that. And you get the point, okay? So this can continue working. I'm even confusing myself here because I've now been recording for an hour straight with no breaks. Okay. Few more things to cover here. If you want, you can convert these to lowercase as well. So if they type something like, yes, this will work. So to do that, we can say dot to lowercase, right? And now if we do that, after what the user types in, we'll convert that to lowercase, and then we'll store that in the variable. So now it doesn't matter the capitalization they type in, this will just work. But obviously, if you convert this to lowercase, make sure the string you're checking is lowercase, because if you do something like yes, then that's never going to work because we're always converting this to lowercase. Okay, last thing we're going to cover here is checking multiple strings in one of the options here. So maybe we want the user to be able to type in yes, or we want them to be able to type in y. Well, how do we check that? Well, now we're going to quickly cover the and, or, and not, which are the logical operators in JavaScript. So let me zoom in a little bit here. Okay, so we have three operators you need to be aware of. The first is a double ampersand, which is and. The second is a double pipe, which is or. And the last is an exclamation point, which is not. Okay, let me just get my slashes correct. Now the not is really simple. The not simply reverses something from true to false. So if I do not true, this is valid by the way, this gives me false. If I do not false, this gives me true. So sometimes what you'll see is something like, x is equal to 2, whatever, and then there's a not sign here. Now when you do that, you're just saying, okay, whatever's inside of here, if it's true, I want it to be false. If it's false, I want it to be true. So the not just flips it, okay, from true to false. That's that. Now the and is how we can check if two things are true. So true and true is going to give you true. True and false is going to give you false. If you have false and true, this is going to give you false. Essentially what it's doing is it's checking both the left and the right and making sure both those things are true. So if both of them are true, you get true. If any of them are false or all of them are false, you get false, okay? Now, it doesn't really make much sense when you're just writing false and true, but oftentimes you'll see things like, x is less than 2 and x is maybe not equal to -1. Maybe that's something you're going to check. I don't know. But the point is, if you do that, now if both these things are true, this whole thing here is going to give you true. Otherwise, it's going to give you false. Okay? That's the and operator. Both the left and the right need to be true. The next operator we can look at is the or operator. Now, the or operator just checks if the left or the right is true. And it could be both of them are true. That's fine. That will give you true. It could be one of them is true. then it's going to give you true. But if both of them are false, it will give you false. So quick example, true or false is equal to true. Okay, false or true is equal to true. True or true is equal to true. And the only situation where you're going to get false is you have false or false is equal to false. Okay, so these are what are known as the logical operators, and they allow us to combine multiple conditions together to check more complex things. So for example, if we go here, when they're typing, crossing the road, we're going to say if, or crossing the bridge, sorry, if cross is equal to yes, or cross is equal to y, then we'll let them cross, okay? So that's what we're doing here. We're saying, okay, let's check multiple things. If they typed in yes, or they typed in y, then we're going to go down this path, right? Now, if you wanted to, you could check multiple. So we could do another or. We could say or cross is equal to okay, whatever you want to check, right? You can check multiple things, then this will work as well. So you can combine ands and ors and multiple ors. We don't need to get into all of that in this video, but I just want to quickly show those to you because they are pretty important and can allow you to make a more advanced game. Okay, so there you go, guys. That is the Choose Your Own Adventure game. I know I really just built kind of a basic version now, but I really want you to extend this and make it more complicated and mess around with it before proceeding. So I just gave you kind of the base, and now you can make something really cool. Anyways, let's move on to project number 2. So let's get started with this second project. Now this is going to be a text-based calculator. That means that we're going to get the user to type in two numbers, so the left side operand and the right side operand, and then some kind of operators like a plus, minus, multiplication, division, etc. So let's go ahead and dive in. We're going to start by using prompt. So in order to do that, we're going to say const prompt is equal to require, and then this is going to be prompt dash sync, and then we are going to call that with the parentheses. Okay, then we're going to ask for two numbers. Let me just zoom in a little bit here. So we're going to say const number1 is equal to prompt, and then this will be please enter number1, or we can just say enter number1. And then let's copy this, and actually let's fix this first and put number2. And then change this to number2. And then lastly, we're just going to call this operator. And we're going to say enter sign. Okay, cool. So it's going to ask them for the first number, the second number, and the sign, and then we're going to perform that math. Now, what I want to do here is essentially check the sign and see if the sign is a plus or a minus or a division or a multiplication or all the different arithmetic operators that we have, which actually I should go through now. And based on what they enter, we're going to perform that arithmetic. So as you saw, we have plus, minus, division, multiplication. We also have the modulus operator. This gives you the remainder after division, but we're not going to go through that right now. And these are kind of the core arithmetic operators we can use. There's a few more, but these are the most popular ones. Now this allows us to add values, subtract values, and essentially perform operations with numbers. So what we're going to do here is actually learn about a new feature in JavaScript called the switch statement. Now the switch statement looks like this, and it's very similar to how the if statement works, except it's just checking the value of a single variable. So if I say switch on my operator, what I can do now is write some different cases, and we're going to check essentially to see what the operator is equal to. So rather than having a bunch of if statements and saying if operator is equal to plus, if operator is equal to minus, if operator is equal to, etc., we can just switch on the operator and then write the cases that correspond with what we want the operator to be equal to. Don't worry, this will make sense in a second. So we're going to say case, and then we can go plus, and then colon. Now, what we'll do is after the colon, in an indented block here, we write anything that we want to run if operator is a plus. So in this case, what we want to do is something like result is equal to number1. So let's type this correctly, plus number2. Then we can say console.log the result, and we can break. Okay, so this is a simple case in a switch statement. Now you need to have case, you have what the value is that you're checking. So again, it's for the value of this variable. Then after the colon, you can write anything that you want to happen in this case. So here, we're going to say result is equal to number1 plus number2. and then we're going to console.log the result and break. However, what we're actually going to do is first define this variable. So we're going to say let result. Now you may not have seen this before, but we can actually define a variable without initializing it or giving it a value. So that's what I'm doing here. And then I can say result is equal to, and I can kind of assign a value to this variable. So right now result will be equal to undefined. That's fine, but it's just something that you can do. So you can kind of say, hey, I want to have a variable called result. I don't want to give it a value quite yet, but later I will give it a value. Okay, so that's the first case. And then what I can do is copy this and paste it. And notice we have this break keyword. Now the break keyword ends the case, and it's very important that you have this. A lot of people miss the break, and then they get errors in their code. So you need to make sure you have the break. This is what separates the cases. So now I'm going to have a minus. Now for the minus, we're just going to change this to be a subtraction. Now you get the idea. We're going to copy this for the other operators that we want to have. So we can have a division and then change this to division. And then we can have an exclamation point and change this to, an exclamation point asterisk, which is multiplication, and then an asterisk for multiplication. Okay, let me make this a little bit smaller so it's easier to read. Okay, so these are the 4 different cases that we have: plus, minus, division, and multiplication. And essentially we just check if the operator is equal to any of them, and then we go into that case. Now we start by checking the first case, and then we move down in sequential order. So let's just run the code and see what we're getting right now. So we can go here and clear and go node and then project2.js and enter number 1. So let's go with 8, enter number 2. Let's go with 9. We'll do a plus, and notice that we actually get 89. Okay, that's a bit weird. Let's try a different case. Let's go 9, 2, and minus, and that time we get 7. Okay. And what happens if we go 3, 4, and then a asterisk? We get 12. So the reason why we got 89 here, when we added 8 and 9, is that when we use this prompt function here, this actually gives us back strings. Now, JavaScript is a really weird language, and when you try to do operations with strings, when you try to do arithmetic operations like plus, minus, division, multiplication, etc. using strings, you can get some wonky results. Now in this case, you saw that when we added these two numbers together, since they were both strings, we actually got a string concatenation. So 8 plus 9 was equal to 89 because these were strings and we simply squished or concatenated them together. Now it works properly with our other cases because of some weird ways that JavaScript works, but what we need to do to ensure that we get the correct result is first convert these strings into numbers. So to do that, we're going to use the function parse float. So what I can do is simply surround my prompt with this parse float, and what it's going to do is simply grab whatever the number is that we type in and convert it to a floating point value or the number type. So that way, when we get a number, we convert it to the number type rather than the string type. So when we perform this operation, everything works properly. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to clear and run, and let's go 9, 9, and plus, and notice this time we get the correct answer, which is 18. Okay, so that's good. Now, you might have noticed down here that when I do this console.log, I'm pretty much just doing the same thing 4 times. So rather than me actually doing this inside of the switch statement, because it's very repetitive, what I'm going to do is take it and move it outside of the switch statement. So I'm going to go down here and put console.log result. Okay, so now let's run the code and just make sure that this works. Let's just go 4, 5, and division, and you see that we get 0.8. Okay, very good. However, what happens if I try to type in a sign that doesn't exist? Well, that's where we're actually going to implement a new case here called the default case. Now, the default case is kind of like the else statement in the if-else block, and this will execute if none of the cases above it were the case. So inside of default, I can do something like console.log, and then invalid, and then I can break out of this default case. Okay, very good. So now if you type anything other than one of these cases, we're going to go into the default block. Again, this is like the else statement, and we'll print out invalid. But what does that mean for our results? Well, let's try it out. We can always just test things and mess around. So if I go here and go with 8 and maybe 9 and like go with something weird like a colon, you can see that we get invalid and then we get undefined. Now, really, we don't want to print anything out unless we actually have a valid result. So why don't we do something to make sure that we have a valid result before we print this? Well, what I can do is actually set up something known as a flag. I'm going to say let valid equal true. Now the idea is I'm going to have this variable, which is a Boolean. We've set it equal to true, and we're going to assume that we have a valid result. However, if we reach this default case, then we can say valid is equal to false, because if we didn't go inside of any of these cases here and exit the switch statement, then we know that we had an invalid operator. So we'll say valid equals false. So then I can go here and say if valid, then we'll print out the result. And notice that I did something weird here. I didn't write the curly braces for my if statement. Now, when you just have a single line that you're using after the if statement, you actually don't need to use the curly braces. It only works like this if you just have a single line that you're executing, which is what I'm doing right here. And I can write the code like this, as you see here. And this is perfectly valid, or I could even do it like this if I wanted to. So I'm going to do that just to show you the shorthand. Now, for the result, what I'm going to do here is the following. I'm just going to print out a little bit of a better kind of output. I'm going to print number 1, and then I'm going to print operator, and then I'm going to print number 2, and then I'm going to do a comma, an equal sign, and then the result. So this way we just print out the whole expression so we can see exactly what we got. Let's zoom out again to make it a little bit easier to read. Okay, so let's run this now. 8, 9 plus, and now it says 9 plus 8 equals 17. Okay, so I just wanted to get the kind of nice output here. Very good. So there you go. We have our switch statement, but what happens if we enter a number that's not valid? Let's try that out. So if I go here and run my code and try to enter something like hello and 1, and maybe I add these together, notice I get nan. I get not a number. Now, why am I getting that? Well, when I use this function right here, parse float, if I accept something in here that's not a number, so a string like hello, then it simply returns to me the type nan, which stands for not a number. So what we need to do ideally is we want to ask the user to keep giving us input until they give us a valid number. So if it's nan, we got to say, hey, no, that's not valid. You got to give us something else. So how can we do that? Well, let's write some code that can handle that for us. But in order to do that, we need to learn about something known as the while loop. Now, the while loop is something that can keep repeating code until a certain condition is met. So what I can do is something like while, and then condition, and then we'll go here, do this. So this is kind of the syntax of a while loop. We say while this thing is true, so whatever we put inside of the parentheses, while that's true, keep doing whatever's inside of the loop. So just keep repeating it over and over and over. Now, this is really good for when we're collecting something like user input, because we can say, while we don't have valid user input, keep asking them to give us input. But let me show you a few examples of how the while loop works. So we're going to say let I equal 0, and we're going to say while I is less than 10. I'm then going to say I plus plus. This is actually a way that you can add 1 to a variable. So plus plus adds 1, minus minus subtracts 1, plus equals 1 adds 1, plus equals 1 adds 2, minus equals 1 or minus equals 2 subtracts 2. I'm just showing you a few ways you can do this here. So I'm going to say I plus plus, and before that, I'm going to say console.log I. Now, if you want to pause the video and take a guess at what the output of this code is going to be, go ahead. I'm going to explain it now. So this is a while loop. We have a variable I, and I tracks how many times this loop has ran. So we say while I is less than 10, we print out the value of I, and then we add 1 to I. So at the first iteration, I is 0, so we print out 0. Then we add 1 to I now becomes 1. We then check if 1 is less than 10, and it is, so we keep looping. So we print out I, so we print out 1. We add 1 to I, so I is now 2, and we repeat this process until eventually I is 10. When I is 10, this condition now is false, so we stop looping. Okay, so let me show you how this works. I'm just going to comment out the rest of the code so I can run this. And so let's go here, bring up our terminal, and notice we get 0 through 9. If we wanted to get 10, we need to make this less than or equal to 10 in order for that to work. Okay. So that is the basics on the while loop, but there's a few keywords in the while loop that we need to understand. The first keyword we want to look at is the continue keyword. So what I'm going to do down here is say if I is equal to 5, then continue. Now what continue will do is simply go up to the top of the loop. And I just need to change this a little bit so that it makes a bit more sense. Okay, so continue just simply stops the while loop where it is and goes back to the beginning. It doesn't change anything, just goes back to the beginning of the loop. So as soon as continues hit, we skip whatever's beneath us and we just go back to the top of the loop. So what I'm implementing here is essentially a skip on 5. So I'm not going to print out 5 if I is equal to 5. That's what I'm doing here when I run this code. And I've adjusted this slightly, but you'll see that when I run this now, we get 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice we skip 5 because I had the continue here, and then we get 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, there you go. Now the next keyword is the break keyword. So if we rewrite this loop, we can actually do it like this. We can say while true, we can say console.log I, we can say I++, and we can say if I is equal to 10, then break. Okay, now what I've done is just written the same loop that we looked at before, except rather than having a condition up here, I've used a different pattern or a different way of writing this where I implement a break. Now what the break does is simply exit the while loop. As soon as you see the break keyword, you just escape the loop. So we say while true, console.log I, add 1 to it, but if I is 10, break out. So now if we run this, you see that we get the same thing, 0 through 9. Okay, perfect. So that is the while loop. And now we're going to use it to actually validate our input. So what we're going to do is the following. We're going to say while true, and we're going to put this number inside of here. Okay, next we're going to say if, and then is nan number 1, then we need to console.log invalid input. Okay, otherwise we are going to break. So this is nan function here simply checks if something is not a number. So if when we try to convert this to a number, it gives us is nan, then that means this is invalid. So we just print invalid and then we ask them for a number again. Otherwise, we break out of the loop. It's as easy as that. So I wrote a simple while loop. I said while true. So this means loop forever. Now, by the way, if you fail to have a break keyword and you have a loop that has while true here, then you're going to have something known as an infinite loop, which means you're just going to be running forever and it's never going to stop unless you manually close the program. So you want to avoid infinite loops and make sure you always have a way to exit them. Okay, so we have while true, ask for the number, convert it to a float. If it's nan, that means it's invalid, so we print out invalid and we ask them to try again. So let's test this out. We're going to go here and we're going to say hello, invalid number. Okay, this invalid, -9, and you see that that works. Okay, perfect. So let's just get out of this. Now I want to do the same thing for number 2. So we can just copy this and paste this here, but change this to say number 2, and then say enter number 2, and then change this to be number 2. Okay, so let's run the code now and just make sure it works for both operators. So we're going to say 9, okay, invalid, and then it works. We can do our plus, and we get an issue here, which I'm going to talk about in 1 second. Okay, so let's fix this problem. So this problem here that we're seeing is it's saying that number 1 is not defined. And the reason it's saying number 1 is not defined is because I've defined this inside of the while loop. Now, when we use this const definition, this means that this variable that we've defined is local to where we defined it. So in this case, it's defined inside of the while loop. Now, I don't want to get too far into something known as scope here, but essentially to fix this issue, what we can do is say let number 1 like this, and we can also just go let number 2 while we're at it. And now rather than using this const, we can just remove that and say number 1 and number 2. So now these variables are defined in this what's known as the global scope because it's like the furthest left in the program. It's not inside of any blocks. So that means that this switch statement now will be able to access number 1 and number 2. Okay, so let's run this and test this out. Okay, 1, 2 plus, and we see that we get the result we're looking for. Okay, now any of you that are being kind of, vigilant here, I guess, would notice that we have pretty much the exact same code 2 times in a row. Now, if you know anything about programmers, they're lazy. They don't like writing the same thing multiple times. There must be a way to optimize this or make it better. And in fact, there is using something known as a function. Now, a function is a way that we can write reusable code. I'm going to go down to the bottom of my program and introduce a basic function, and then we'll show you a more complex one. So a function works like this. You just say function, you give the function a name, and by the way, the name of the function follows the same rules as the naming for variables. So it can't start with a number, you can use underscores. If you have multiple words, you can't use spaces, for example. So I'm going to do function, and let's go maybe get number is what we want. And I'm going to write a set of parentheses and a set of curly braces. Now, this function is something that's callable and can contain reusable code that we can call whenever we need it. So pretty much the way that this will work is you have this function named here. So the way this function will work is you have a name, you have a set of parentheses, and inside of the parentheses, you can take what is known as a parameter. Now, a parameter is input to the function that you can then use within the function. It's like a variable you pass to the function. Now, within the function, you can do something, and if you want, you don't have to, you can return a value. Okay, so we've actually already seen functions and we've been using them a ton. In fact, parse float, this is a function. This is a parameter or a value we pass to the function, and the float function here returns a value to us. It returns a number. Okay, so we're going to write our own function that does this. So let me show you here. I'm going to say get number, and I'm going to take in just some number. Okay, now this will be like what number we want. So it'll be like number 1, number 2, like the number of the number we want. I know it's a little bit confusing, but that's the parameter that I'm going to take in. And in fact, let's just call this number string maybe to make it a little bit more clear. Then what we can do inside of this function is we can copy what we have here. So let's copy this. And I'll show you how we write the code in a function. So rather than saying number 1 is equal to parse float, we're just going to say const number is equal to parse float. And then same thing with isNaN, because this function is going to be reused multiple times. Now, rather than having enter number and then 1, what I'm going to do is write a string concatenation. So I'm going to say enter number plus the number string plus, and then this is going to be a colon and a space. Now, the reason I need to do this is inside of the prompt function, I cannot pass commas or different values, so I just need to pass one string. So I'm going to create one large string. Now, number string is going to be like this, like first, second. So it's going to say enter number 1, or sorry, number string is going to be 1 or 2 or 3, how I have it here. So it's going to say enter number 1, enter number 2, enter number 3, etc. That's what I'm kind of trying to get at here with this input. So now we check all the same stuff that we did before. Except this time, what I can do is rather than having the break here, I can say return, and then I can return the number that we got. Now, this return keyword allows us to give a value back to whatever called the function. So the way you call a function is you write the name of it, you put a set of parentheses, and then any parameters that it needs, you pass them. So I could say get number, and then, we could say 1 or 2. And then what will happen is this is going to return to us whatever the number is that the user typed in. That's how the function works. But the great thing is I can call the function multiple times and reuse this code in as many places as I need and really write some cleaner, easier to understand code. Okay, there's a lot of other benefits of functions, but that's how it works. Now, this return keyword can be used multiple times. However, as soon as this keyword is encountered, the function immediately exits. So the reason I removed the break keyword here is that we don't need it, because the return acts as a natural break for this while loop, where as soon as we see return, anything that's happening in this function stops and we go back to wherever this function was called. I know it's a little bit confusing, but I'm just going to take this now and show you how we use it. So let's remove this and this, okay? And we're going to go to the top of our program because typically we write our functions at the top, and we're going to put get number. And now we're just going to use it. So we're going to say const number 1 is equal to get number, and we're just going to put 1. And then we're going to do the same thing for number 2. So let's copy this and paste it and go with 2 and then number 2. Okay? So now we're doing the exact same thing we had before, except we're reusing this code inside of a function, so we're not writing the same thing multiple times. Now, one thing to note, you can take in multiple parameters. So if you wanted to, you could write another variable here that's required for the function, and then you would have to pass it like this. We're going to look at more functions later on, so don't worry too much about them, but this is a way to write reusable code, and it's very important, and we use it a lot. Okay, so now we have this function that gets the number for us. We handle a lot of the stuff that's going on here with the arithmetic. So let's run the code. Let's enter a number like this. Okay, invalid input. Let's go 98. Let's enter something invalid. Okay, invalid because we're using that function. Let's go -9 and let's divide them. And there you go. We get 10.888889. Great. Now we can try this as many times as we want, but let's see what happens if we do something like this. 89, 0, and then division. Now notice that gives us infinity. Now we probably don't want infinity. Instead, we probably want to give like a 0 division error. So let's see how we can fix that. I'm going to go to my division here, and I'm just going to add a check. I'm going to say if, and we're going to go with, what is this going to be? If number 2, which is the one that's at the bottom, is equal to 0, then I am going to do the following. I'm going to say valid equals false, and console.log 0 division error. Okay, otherwise, actually, we can still set the result because it doesn't matter, but then down here, we just won't print out the result because, well, it will be invalid because valid is equal to false. Okay, so I just want to check that this works. So let's run this, enter some number, 0, divide, and we get 0 division error. Okay, so that's pretty much it for project 2. All of this code will be available from the link in the description, by the way, in case you want to paste any of this in. But I just wanted to show you, for example, the while loop, the switch statement, how you do things like convert strings to numbers, different errors that can pop up, how we write a function. So hopefully you learned a lot from this project. In the next one, we're going to learn even more. So let's move on to project 3. Okay, so now we're moving on to project number 3, which is a contact management system. The idea here is I want to build a simple application that allows me to manage my contacts. So something like a contacts app in your phone. A contact is just going to have a name and an email, but technically we could add as many values to it as we want. Now, this contact app is going to have some different functionality. We're going to have the ability to add a contact, delete a contact, search for a contact, view the contacts, and then exit the application. So I want to start by just defining what that functionality is and kind of setting up some routing in my application because this will be a little bit larger and showing you how you create something slightly more complex. Anyways, let's get into it. So let's start by importing prompt. We're going to say const prompt is equal to require prompt dash sync. And then we're going to call this. And I just want to print out an informational message here that kind of displays the functionality. So let's make a function. And to do that, we're going to say function, and we'll just say print info. This doesn't need to take in any parameters, and it doesn't need to return anything. And we can just kind of log some information about the system. So we can say contact management system like that. We can go console.log. And we can print out some of these. We can say console.log, and then I'm going to define the different operations we could perform. So the first operation is going to be add a contact. Okay. Then we're going to go to delete a contact. Then we're going to go with 3, which will be view contacts. Then we're going to go with 4, which will be search contacts. And then lastly, we're going to go with 5, which will be exit. Okay, so let's test this out. Let's call the function print info. When we call the function, it will just run this, and we should get some information. So let's go clear and run. And oops, I'm running the wrong app. So let's just go through this. Okay, and let's change this to be project3.js. And you see that we get some information. All right, so now that we've got this, what we're gonna do is start setting up kind of some routing in our application. So what I'm gonna do is make a switch statement, and that switch statement will handle the different operations that the user could potentially enter. So let's start with print info, that's fine. And then let's do kind of a prompt here. So we're gonna say const, and this is gonna be number is equal to prompt. And we're gonna say enter an operation. Okay, and that could be 1, 2, 3, or 5. And we can kind of give them some hint here by saying, you know, it's 1 through 5. Okay, Then here, we're going to set up the switch. So we're going to say switch on number. Okay, and remember that number is a string. So what I'm going to do is set up some cases. So I'm going to say case 1 and then break. And then I'm going to say case 2 and then break. Now I'm just kind of setting up what we'll handle in these different cases. And then we're going to say case 3 and then break, case 4 and then break, not broadcast channel, and case 5. Oops, what's going on here? Okay, come on, case 5 and then break. And then lastly, we're going to do a default case. So I'm going to say default, and then I'm going to go console.log. Maybe we'll go unknown, and then we will break. Okay, now let's actually, I don't know why I added these spaces. Let's remove them so it's easier to read for now at least. But the point is we now have 5 different cases. Now for each of these cases, we're going to handle the different operations. And what I actually want to do ideally is just ask the user to keep entering these different operations. So what I can do is simply set up a while loop here. I can say while true, and then I can put the switch inside of this. Okay, so if we want, we can kind of indent this in so it's a little bit cleaner. And let's make this a little bit larger. Okay, so while true, we're going to do this. We're just going to keep asking them to enter operations. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to allow the user to get out of this loop. So actually, we'll set up a variable, and we'll just say let keep going equal to true. And then we're going to use keep going here. So I'm going to say while keep going, and I'm going to go to case 5. And what I'm going to do is say keep going is equal to false. So all I'm doing in case 5 is saying, hey, if we type in 5, that means we want to exit, right? That's the operation we have here. So we're just going to set this variable equal to false, which means we'll stop looping. So we'll stop kind of handling the routing of what it is that we want to do. Now for the rest of the cases, I want to set up a function that allows us to kind of handle what we need to do. So I'm just going to write 5 functions here. So I'm going to say function add contact. Okay, I'm going to say function delete contact. I'm going to say function search contact, and I'm going to say function list contacts. And for this, I'm going to take in the contacts that I want to list. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second, but here are the 4 functions that we need. So now I'm just going to call these functions. So from 1, I'm going to say add contact. From 2, I'm going to say delete contact. From 3, I'm going to say search contact. And from 4, I'm going to say, what was this one? List. I think actually I have it in the wrong order. So this is going to be search contact, and this I believe is going to be list contact. Okay, and this is list contacts. So I think that's what we have. Yes, looks good. And then we have to remember pass contacts here. Okay, so now this is like the router, if you want to think of it like that. So what happens if you type in 1, we go to this function and we do whatever we're going to put here. If you type in 2, we do this. And this is how I like to start writing my programs, because it gives me really clear kind of separation and allows me to write one of these functions at a time, which just makes my life so much easier when I'm programming. So you can kind of see, like, I'm writing this from scratch. I haven't written this before. So I'm just planning things out by kind of making these different functions, some different areas in my code. So now I just need to tackle one function at a time. But before we can do that, we need to learn about arrays, because arrays are how we're going to handle storing our different contacts. Now, an array looks like this. Const arr is equal to a set of square brackets. It's essentially a way to store multiple elements that have a position or an index, okay? So we can say const array is equal to a set of square brackets. This is an empty array, but I can put some values in here, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, each one of these values is accessible using their position or their index, and their index starts at 0. So let me just go to the comment here. So number 1 or value 1 is actually at position 0 or index 0. 2 is at position 1, 3 is at position 2, and 4 is at position 3. Okay, so you always start counting at 0 when we're talking about the index or the position in the array. Now, the reason that's important is with this array, I can modify a value by using its position. So I can say array, use these square brackets, at 0 is equal to something like 9. If I do this, now the value here will change, and we can prove that by printing out our array. Let me just comment out the rest of this code. So when I run it, we just get this. Okay, so if we look here and we run, you see we get 9, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you can access values using their index or their position, and you can change them as well. Now, if I wanted to, I could just maybe print out the value of array at index 1, and that's going to give me 2 because I'm accessing this, which is the second position, right, which is the first index. So I know it's a little bit weird, but we start 0, 1, 2, 3. Now, a few more things about arrays you need to know about. You can access their length using .length. So if you want to see the length, you can do it like that. And there's a bunch of methods you can use on arrays. So one of the reasons arrays are useful is that you can actually add values to them. So I can say array.push, and I can push, for example, the value 10, and then print out the array. And you'll see now when I run this, the 10 gets added to the end of the array. So the size has increased. Now, just like we can push values into the array, we can pop them or remove them. Now, when we pop, this simply removes the last element from the array. So when I run this, now we get 1, 2, 3. Now we also have the ability to splice. So splice can remove an element based on its index. So if I wanted to remove 3, I would go splice 2 and then comma 1. Now the 1 here specifies the number of elements after the index that I've specified that I want to remove. So when I do 2, 1, that means just remove this element. But if I were to make this 2, that means we're going to remove 3 and 4. So you can see here, if I go and run my code, I get 1, 2, 4. Okay, so that's arrays, but next we're going to talk about objects. Now objects are a way that we can group information together. So here's an example of an object. I can say something like const contact is equal to, I use a set of curly braces, and then I can do something like name is equal to Tim, and maybe email, I need to do a comma here though, is equal to tim@gmail.com. Now an object is like a key value pair. We have a key, which is known as a property, so that's this right here. We do a colon, and then we can assign some value to it. Now in this case, I'm assigning a value like a string, but I could assign a list, I could assign another object, and sorry, when I say a list, I mean array. I could assign another object, I could assign a number, I could assign a Boolean, it doesn't matter. We can put anything that we want here. Now, these properties can be accessed in the following way. We can say contact dot, and then we can use the name of the property, so like name or email if we wanted to access it. If we want to change it, we can do contact.email is equal to something like this. That's perfectly valid. And we can also add additional properties, or we can do something like contact name is equal to Tim, and we can use this kind of square bracket syntax. So you can see how this would be useful for us to store, for example, a contact, because we can group a name and an email together, and we can have additional information if we wanted to. Okay, so that's how that works. Now, a quick note here. You might have noticed that I defined my array using a constant, yet I'm changing the array afterwards. Now, the reason why this works is an array, and also an object, many types in JavaScript, are what's known as mutable. Mutable means that once they're defined, they can be modified. So it's different from creating a new array. We're modifying this array here. So the array itself is like the same array, but the contents of it are changing. So that's why const is allowed, because I'm not adding a new array here. I'm just modifying the existing one because it's referred to as mutable. Mutable meaning changeable. Now, if I tried to do like array is equal to this wouldn't work because now I'm trying to take a new array and assign that to a constant variable. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, but that's a concept known as mutable or mutability. So let's remove this now, and let's now create a array. So I'm going to scroll up here, and I'm going to say const contacts is equal to an array. This is what we're going to use now to store our different contacts, and it can grow larger and larger as we add new contacts. Now I'm also going to go to list contacts, and I'm just going to pass this array now so that when we pass or we call list contacts, it will show it. And we're going to go in list contacts and just really quickly write out console.log and then contacts. We're going to make this look better later, but for now, we'll just print out the different contacts. Okay, great. So now after that, we're going to go to add contact, and now we have the ability to add a contact. So when we add a contact, what we want to do is ask for the name and the email. We're then going to create an object that stores that information and add that to our contacts array. So I'm going to say const name is equal to prompt, And then this is going to be name colon like that. I'm then going to say const email is equal to prompt, and then I'm going to take in the email. Then what I'm going to do is create my contact. So I'm going to say const contact is equal to name, and email. Okay, so we've just created an object, and then we can just say contacts dot push, and we can push the contact. Perfect. So now we have the add contact function, and we can test it out and see if it's working. So let's run this, and we're going to go add a contact. We're going to go Tim, and then tim@gmail.com. Then we can list the contact. So actually, let's add another one. Let's go Joe, and then joe@gmail.com. And now we're going to do operation 3. And you see that we get our 2 contacts, and then we can exit with 5. Okay, perfect. So that is a good start. Let me make this a little bit smaller so it's easier to read. So now we have the ability to list the contacts and to add them. However, we probably want the list to look a little bit nicer and to do something like kind of, print them out in a nicer formatted way. So to do that, we're now going to learn about a new feature known as a for loop. Now, anything that you can do in a for loop, you can do in a while loop. Now, a for loop is typically used when you know the number of times that you want to loop. And usually you use it when you're interacting with some kind of structure like an array. You don't have to, but it's very common to use it with arrays. So what I'm going to show you is a basic for loop. It looks like this, just bear with me. We say for let, and then we create some kind of variable. This variable is going to track the number of iterations that this for loop has gone through. So this will look familiar to the while loop, but I'm going to say for let I equals 0. I'm going to say I is less than 10. This is my condition for looping. And notice I have a semicolon here. It's important that you have that to separate these. And then I'm going to have my increment or my change. So I'm going to do I plus plus. What I'm saying is I want to start I at 0. I want to loop while I is less than 10, and every iteration of this loop, so as soon as one of it finishes, I want to add 1 to I. Now I could add 2 to I. I could start in the reverse direction, like let I equal 10, I is, greater than 0, and I minus minus. If you want to pause the video and see how that would work, feel free. But you can do any kind of combination you want here, but what's common is to loop up to, some number, for example. And notice I know how many times the loop's going to run here. So what I could do now is say console.log I, and if we kind of comment out all of this, let me just do it like this, and I run my code, you'll see that we're going to count up to 10. So we go 0 through 9. Okay, similar to what we did with the while loop previously. Now, that's useful, but a lot of times we actually use this to iterate through an array. So for example, if I have an array like this, and I have, const array is equal to 1, 2, 3, or let's do something else. Let's go like apple, peach, pear. Okay, so we have some fruits. What I might do is something like let I equal 0, I is less than ARR dot length, and then I might print out ARR at index I. Now what I'm doing is I'm using this for loop to loop through all of the values in the array. So what I'm doing is saying, okay, I'm going to treat I like the index. So what I'm accessing in the array. I'm going to start it at 0 because that's the first one. And I'm going to go up to the array.length, but I'm not going to include that one. Then I'm going to add 1 to I every iteration, and I'm going to access the array at index I. So if I do this now, you'll see that when I run the code, we get apple, peach, pear, because I'm looking at each index in this array and printing it out. Now, if I were to maybe make a mistake and do less than or equal to, meaning we're going to go up to 3, index 3, which actually doesn't exist here, you'll see that what happens is we get undefined. So no crash or error occurs in our program, but we try to access an index that doesn't exist because array.length is not an index that's valid. It's only one less than the length of the array, so we got undefined. Okay, that's our for loop. So we're going to use the for loop now inside of list contacts, but we're going to use a variation of it that's a little bit cleaner. So we're going to say for, and we're going to say let contact of contacts. So you saw previously that what I did is I accessed the values by their index, but we don't actually need to do that. What we can do instead is we can just use the structure itself and get all of the elements. So what you looked at before is iterating by index. This time we're going to iterate by item. So you can say let contact of contacts. This variable can be anything that you want. You just need to use let, and then you can say of something like an array. And when you do this, now JavaScript is going to give contact each of the values inside of the contacts array. So rather than having to access the index manually, this will just be equal to each contact in the order in which they exist in the array, and then we can print them out. So I can say console.log, and I'm going to say contact.name and console.log contact.email, because remember, contacts are objects. Each object will have a name and an email. So once I access the object from my contacts list, then, or from the array, sorry, I'm going to keep using list because I'm used to Python, then I can access its name and its email. And we can just add a little bit of formatting here and just go kind of name like this, and we'll go email like this. Okay. And what else do we want to do? We're just going to add something like this, print, and then a bit of separation. So let's just do some number signs so it's a bit easier to see. Okay, so I just want to print out or test out my listing contacts. So let's go here. Let's go add a contact, tim@gmail.com, and let's list this with option 3. And we got an error. What is the error here? It says print is not a function. Okay, my apologies. Where did I put print? Believe we might have put that. Where did we put print? Okay, so I found it here. My apologies. This needs to be console.log. So let's test that again. Okay, run 1 tim@gmail.com. And then we'll go 3, and you can see that it prints out this contact. Now, if we want to add another one, we can do that. So let's go Joey, and then, Joey@gmail.com, and we'll go 3, and you can see that we now get both of our contacts. Awesome. Now, we probably want to just add a little bit of separation here to make this look a bit cleaner. So what I'm going to do is, after the operation, I'm going to say console.log, and I'm just going to log an empty line here. Now, that's one way to do it. Okay, so now that we have that, I'm also just going to go to my add contact here. And after we add the contact, I'm just going to say console.log and then added. Okay, nice. So now we're going to move on to the delete contact. Now, to delete the contact, what we're going to do is list each of the contacts, but this time we're going to list them with a number beside their name. Now, we're going to do that so that we can delete the contact by simply referencing the number of the contact. So the idea is we'll print out all the contacts with 1, 2, 3, etc. beside their name, and then we can just delete the one with what number we select. So if we select number 2, we'll delete contact number 2. So to do that, we're going to use a for loop, and we're going to say for, and this is going to be let I equal 0, I is less than contacts dot length, and then I plus plus. Now, the reason I'm using this style of for loop now is because I want to know what number contact I'm on. I want to know the index associated with it so that I'm able to delete it later. Whereas here, I don't care what contact I'm on, so I just do it like this. But if I want to know the index or the position, then I need to use this style of for loop. There's actually other styles as well, but these are the two most common ones. So now I'm going to say contact is equal to, and this is going to be contacts at index I. Then I'm going to say console.log, and I'm going to log, and we're going to go with I plus 1. And then, actually, we're going to do something different so that you guys can see how this works. We're going to go I plus 1 dot to string plus a colon, and then this is going to be comma contact dot name. Okay, so I know this is a bit confusing, but what I'm doing is I'm taking I, which will start out equal to 0, and I'm adding 1 to it. That way we don't start with contact number 0, we start by displaying contact number 1. We then convert this to a string, and the reason I'm converting this to a string is so that I can add a colon to it without having a space. So I take this expression, which is I plus 1, which is a number, I surround it in parentheses. And then that way I can take that whole thing and convert that whole thing to a string. That's how you do that, by the way, using .toString. And then now that it's a string, I can add it to this colon. And now that I can add it to this colon, I can then print out contact name after that using the comma separation so that I have a space in between. So let's just quickly test this first before we go any further. So let's go here and run this and add a contact and go name Tim at gmail.com. Let's go now to delete a contact, and you can see that it starts listing our contacts. So we have one Tim. Perfect. So what we'll do now is we'll just add maybe a console.log here, and we'll say contact numbers or contact IDs maybe. Okay. Then we're going to do a prompt here. So we're going to say const number is equal to prompt, and we're going to say enter an ID. Okay. Now we're just going to parse this as an int. So we're going to imagine that they do give us a valid number. I'm not going to check for that input. And we're just going to make sure that this is within the range of our contacts. So we're going to say if number is greater than contacts dot length, then what I'm going to do is what's known as a naked or a bare return, and I'm just going to return. So I'm going to say is, okay, you know what, if you gave us something that's not valid, we're not even going to give you any error message. We're just going to return and exit the program. Now we could give them an error message if we want to, now that I think of it. So we can just say maybe like this, console.log invalid. Otherwise, we can remove the contact. So to remove the contact, we can do the following. We can say contacts.splice, and we can splice at whatever the number is they gave us -1, and then 1, and then console.log. So let's go back here, removed. Okay, and let's add a capital R. Perfect. So pretty much what I'm doing here is saying, okay, we're going to grab this ID that they want to delete and convert it to an integer. If it is greater than contacts.length, and I guess I supposedly can do this too, if it's nan, so if it's not a number, or it is greater than contacts.length, then it's invalid and we can return. Otherwise, we're simply going to remove it by using .splice. And the reason why I'm doing number -1 is because they're going to give me ID 1. Or ID 2 or ID 3. They're not going to give me ID 0. So I need to subtract 1 from whatever they typed in to convert what they're typing in to the corresponding index that we want to remove from our contacts list or from our contacts array. Sorry if I keep saying list. In Python it's list, in JavaScript it's array, and I usually work in Python, so I keep mixing it up. Anyways, point is, this should work and it should remove the contact from our array. So let's try this now. I'm going to go to add a contact. I'm going to go Tim at gmail.com. Okay, let's list it, and we can see that we have that. And now let's try to remove it. So let's go here. And what is the issue this time? We got a problem saying parse int is not defined because I spelled parse incorrectly. So let's spell parse correctly this time. So parse like that. Okay, that looks better. Let's clear, rerun, whiz through this quickly. Okay, and then delete, and we're going to enter ID maybe 2, invalid. Okay, so let's try again. Enter ID 1, removed, print it out, and we don't have any contacts, and then we can quit with 5. Okay, amazing. So now we have the ability to add contacts, to delete contacts, to list the contacts, and the last thing we need to do is search for contacts. So to search for contacts, what we're going to do is create kind of a results array. And we're going to put contacts in there where the name that the user typed is contained in that contact. You'll see what I mean, but let's start here. So we're going to say const search string is equal to prompt, and we're going to say search : like that. Now they're going to enter some kind of name. And what I want to do is check if that name exists in any of my contacts. So for example, I might have contacts like Tim, Timothy, and John. And the user might type in something like TI. Now, since TI is contained within both Tim and Timothy, like this substring exists inside of these, that means that I would return these two contacts. Whereas if I type something like, OHN, well, OHN exists inside of John, so I would return John. So that's the basic search kind of algorithm we're going to write. You can make it more complex if you want, but that's what we're going to do. Now, I'm also going to convert this to lowercase. So we're going to take whatever they type in and just immediately convert it to lowercase. Okay, now we're going to use a for loop, and we're going to say const results is equal to an empty array, and we're going to store our results in that array. And we're going to say for, and this is going to be, we'll go const contact of contacts, and this should be a let, my bad. And what we will do is we will say if the search string, or if the contact dot name dot includes the search string, don't worry, I'll explain what that does in a second, then we're going to say results dot push, and we're going to push in the contact. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm getting the contact's name, and I'm using this dot includes. Now dot includes simply checks if whatever string I put here exists inside of this name string here. So it's doing exactly what I explained before. If it does, we're going to say results.push, and we're going to push this contact into the results. And then lastly, we're going to say list contacts, and we're going to list the results. So I'm using this function again, but this time rather than using all of my contacts, I'm just passing the results so that I can reuse this code. Okay, amazing. So let's test this out and see if that works. So we're going to say add tim at gmail.com. Okay, one, we're going to go Timothy, timo at gmail.com. And let's go one, John at gmail.com. Okay, and then let's go 3. Okay, we're listing them out. Let's go with 4 to search, and let's search for TI. And for some reason, we didn't get any results. And the reason we didn't get any results is because we've converted this to lowercase, but we haven't converted the name to lowercase. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a dot to lowercase like this. And by the way, this is valid even though it's not super clean. We can go contact.name to lowercase, and then we can check if this whole thing, which is the name converted to lowercase, includes this string, and hopefully that should work for us. So let's quit this and try again. Okay, we're gonna go one, Tim at gmail.com. 1, Timothy, Timo at gmail.com. Okay, 1, John, and then John at hotmail.com. And then we're going to go and list and then search, and we're going to search for TI. And you can see that we get Tim and Timothy. Now let's try searching again with maybe TIMO, and we just get Timothy. Let's try searching with JO, and we get John. Okay, amazing. So that is working, and that's going to wrap up this contact management project. All of this code will be available from the link in the description in case you want to check it out, but hopefully you learned a lot. And now we're moving on to project 4. All right, so we are diving into project number 4 here, which is going to be tic-tac-toe or X's and O's, whatever you prefer to call it. Now, for this project, we're just going to start by creating kind of a board where we'll store the X's and O's, and this will allow me to explain the project a bit better. So what I'm going to do is make an array, and I'm going to call this my board, and I'll just start with a simple array like this. Now, what we're actually going to do is we're going to learn about a concept here known as nested arrays or multi-dimensional arrays. Now, when we talk about a board, the idea is we're going to have certain rows and columns, right? For example, maybe we have an X, we have an O, we have an X, right? Maybe we have a blank, an X, an O, but you get the idea, right? This is kind of what our board could potentially look like. Now, in this case, we have 3 rows and we have 3 columns. And each one of the positions here, we can kind of represent by their row and column position. So for example, we could say, this is column 0, 1, 2. And then we could have, let's do it on this side. This is row 0, row 1, and row 2. So if I want to access the middle position, that would be position 1, 1, or we could say 1, 1, doesn't matter what way we want to read it. If we want to access this position, we could say that's at 2, 2. Okay, so we want to find a way to do this or represent this in code, and that's where our multi-dimensional array is going to come in. So what I'm going to do is inside of this array, I'm going to create 3 new arrays. Now, each one of these arrays is going to represent one of the rows inside of our board. Now, by the way, this is perfectly valid. You can have arrays inside of arrays. We can go to any level of nesting that we want. And what we'll do is we'll create some strings here, and we're just going to make them empty strings for now. Okay, so we'll have a space inside of them, and we'll do that 3 times. Now, these are going to be the positions in our board. And don't worry, this will make a bit more sense in a minute. But I just want to kind of set this up. Okay, so now we have 3 rows. And inside of each of these rows, we have 3 strings, and these will represent the different positions in our board. So eventually what we'll do is we'll place maybe an X here, we'll place an O here. You get the idea, okay? That's what we're gonna end up doing. Now let's talk about how we use this array, because this is probably something you haven't seen before. Now this is again known as a multi-dimensional array or a nested array. And the way that I access the elements here is like this. So if I do board, and then I access index 0, that gives me the first element in my array, which is simply this array. So it accesses this entire array. So again, that would go to this array. Now, if I wanted to access an individual position within the array, I would need to index it again. So I could do, for example, 0, 0. And when I do that, this portion accesses this array. And then we have this array, and I'm accessing the 0th index on that, which is the first position here, or the top left-hand corner. If I wanted to access this, then I would do 2. Okay, so we can kind of access which row we want, and then what column within the row we want to see. Now, that's the same if we want to change it, so I could do, is equal to X, or whatever I want. That's perfectly valid. So that's how a multi-dimensional array works, and that's what we're going to be using here to represent our X's and O's. So the first thing that I want to do here is I want to write a function that allows me to insert an element inside of this board. So what I need to do is I need to get a row and a column that I want to insert this inside of, and then I need to know whether I'm inserting an X or an O. So I'm going to say function, and we're going to call this maybe make move. And what we're going to do is take in the turn and the board that we want to insert this move into. So the turn is going to be whether or not it's an X that we're placing or an O that we're placing, and the board will simply be this array that we're going to insert inside of. Now what we'll do is we'll start by collecting some input from the user. So we're going to say const row is equal to prompt. We'll write that in 1 second, and we're going to say enter row. Okay, so the user is going to give us the row, and then they're also going to give us the column. So let's put that here. I'm going to say const call and then enter call. Now, because we're using prompt, I do need to import that. So I'm going to say const prompt is equal to require and then prompt dash sync. And then we're going to call this. So now we're able to use that. Okay, so we're going to grab the row and the column, and just like before, what I want to do is convert these into numbers. So we're going to wrap this in the parse int function. Now we're just going to assume that they give us valid numbers here, although actually we can handle if they give us not a number. We'll look at that in a second. And again, remember, I haven't already written this, so I might change some things around. I'm trying to kind of show you my thought process as we build this out. So I have my board, and I want to just start by being able to insert X's and O's inside of here. So my idea is I'll ask the user to enter a row and a column that they want to insert their X or O into, so where they want to make their move. Okay, so we have the row and the column, but we need to check and make sure there's not already an element there, and that they give us a valid row and column. For example, if they say the row is 7 or something, well, we only have 3 rows, so that doesn't make sense, right? Same thing if they give us a row and column where there's already an element, like they can't place something there, override it. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure, first of all, that the row and the column are within the range of the board. So we're going to say if the row is less than 1 or the row is greater than 3, then we can say console.log invalid row. Okay. Otherwise, we can say else if, and then we can check the column. We can say if the column is less than 1 or the column is greater than 3, then we can say console.log invalid column. And also, while we're at it, we can check if these are nan. So I can say if is nan row or this, and I can say if is nan call or this. And let me just move this over. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm setting up some if statements, right? So I'm going to say if it's not a number, or the row is less than 1, or the row is greater than 3, because we're going to get them to enter either 1, 2, or 3, right, for the valid rows, then we say it's invalid. And same thing with the column. And then otherwise, what we'd do here is we would insert the correct X or O into the correct position. Now, like before, we want to keep asking them to enter a row and column until they give us a valid row and column. So what we can do is set up a while loop here, and we can say while true, if I can get the indentation here correct, and then I can put all of this inside of here. Okay, so we're going to say while true, do all of this, and then in the else statement, we're going to break out. Okay, so what will happen now is we're going to check, all right, is the row valid? If it's not, then we're just going to print out invalid row, and then we would just ask them again to enter another row and column. Now, same thing for the column. We're going to check, okay, is the column valid? If it's not, then we're going to ask them again to enter a row and a column. Otherwise, we're going to break, but before we break, I'm going to insert into the board whatever the user's turn is. So I'm going to say board row -1, and then col -1 is equal to, and then this is going to be the turn. But I also need to make sure that there's not already something in the board. So let's check that as well. So let's make another else if, and we're going to say else if the board at row -1, col -1 does not equal the space, then we're going to say console.log invalid position. Okay, and we're going to fix our indentation. Okay, so I know I'm kind of doing a lot here, but we're checking if the row is valid, we're checking if the column's valid, and then we're looking inside the board at the row -1 and the column -1. The reason I'm subtracting 1 is because we start at the 0 index, but we're going to have them enter like 1 through 3. So if they enter row 1, really we want to use the row at index 0, so we need to subtract 1 from what they've entered. So I look at the board, at the row and the column position, and I make sure that it's equal to a empty string or a space. If it's not equal to that, then that means that there's something else there, so we say invalid position. Otherwise, we're okay to go ahead and enter in whatever their turn is to the board and then break. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to say make move. I'm going to do a turn of X and pass my board, and then I'm going to console.log my board. Now I'm just going to repeat this 2 times, and I'm going to make this with an O, just so that I can test this out and see if it's working. Okay, so let's run our code and give this a test. So this is going to be project4.js, and it says enter a row. So let's try maybe -1 and 5. And you can see it says invalid row. Okay, so we need to enter another row. So let's go row 2, column 4. Okay, invalid column, that's working. Let's go 2, 2. Okay, now notice we enter now in the middle position our X. Now it's working for the O, so let's do maybe 2, 2, an invalid position because the X is already there. But if I do 1, 1, you can see that we enter O at position 1, 1. Okay, amazing. So that's working. Now what I want to do is I want to make it so that our turns alternate. So the first player is X, then the O player goes, and we keep alternating until the board is full. So let's remove this, and let's set up a variable to keep track of whose turn it is. So we're going to say let turn equal X, and then we'll kind of toggle the turn from X to O as we go through here. I'm then also going to create a variable called turn count, and we're going to make this equal to 0. And this is just going to keep track of how many turns have occurred. We're then going to say while the turn count is less than, and this is going to be 9 because the maximum number of turns that we could do is 9, right? Because we have 9 positions we can enter in the board. And then I'm going to enter this while loop. Now the first thing I'll do is I'll just increment my turn count. So I'll just say turn count plus plus to add 1 to it so that we know we're kind of on the first turn. Now, actually, yeah, let's leave that there, but we're going to put that at the end of the while loop. I just like to add some kind of increment to make sure that I'm not going to get that infinite loop. Now what we'll do is we'll ask the user to make a move. So we're going to say make move, and then we're going to put the turn and the board. Okay, perfect. Then we are going to cycle the turn. So we're going to say if the turn is equal to X, then what we want to do is say turn is equal to O. And I think that's an O, not a 0. Let me just make sure because they kind of look the same. Okay. And then we'll say else turn is equal to x. So all this is doing is just swapping the turn between x and O. So if the turn is equal to x, switch it to O. If it's O, we switch it to x. Okay, and then we increment our turn count down here. Perfect. Now we also want to print out the board. So let's go and say console.log, and then we'll log the board. We're going to write a function that will make this look a little bit nicer for us, but that's the basics. Okay, so we have our making move. We're kind of cycling between the two turns. And let's see now if we can enter kind of 9 positions. So let's go 1, 1. Okay, let's go 1, 2. Let's go 1, 3. Let's go 2, 1, 2, 2. And you can see we're kind of switching between X and O. 2, 3, 3, 1. Okay, that's invalid. So we're going to go 3, 2, 3, 3. And you can see we have our X's and our O's being entered in the board. Amazing. So now let's make it so we print out our board a little bit nicer, because obviously this is kind of difficult to see and it doesn't look very nice. So let's make a new function and let's call this just print board. Okay, so if I can type correctly here, function print board. Okay, I'm really struggling here. All right. We're back. Function print board. We're going to take in the board and we're going to print it out. So in order to print the board, what I want to do is print kind of each symbol and then have like a separator like this so we can kind of see the rows and the columns. Now, in order to do that, I need to actually loop through my board. So I need to loop through each row and each column or each element inside of that. And that's going to involve using something known as a nested for loop. So we're going to do one for loop to print the row. So we're going to say for, and I'm going to say let, and we're going to go row equal 0. Or actually, let's go with I. Let I equal 0. We're going to say I is less than the board dot length. And then we're going to say I plus plus. Okay. Now what this is going to do is loop through all of the different rows that we have in our board. So we can say the const row is equal to board at index I, and that's going to give us this whole array. But now that we have this whole array, we want to print out each individual element in this row. So what we're going to do is make another for loop inside of here that now is going to loop through the row that we have. So now what we can do is we can say for, and we're going to use a different variable this time. So not I, I'm going to use j so that I can keep track of the row index as well as the column index. And we're going to say that's equal to 0. We're going to say j is less than, and then this is going to be board I dot length. And then we're going to say j plus plus. Now the reason why I did board I dot length here is because we're looping through this row. So actually we can just say row dot length to make that a little bit more clear. And we're just seeing, okay, how many elements are inside of this row. Now we know it's 3, but just to make it a bit more dynamic, we're going to use the actual length of the row we're looking at, and that's how we'll iterate through j. So now we have one variable I, and for every single time we iterate through our row, and for every single time we do this loop here, we're going to do this loop 3 times, or however many rows or how many columns, we have inside of the row. So this for loop inside of here is going to end up running 9 times because this for loop runs 3 times, and then this exterior for loop runs 3 times. So because this happens 3 times for each one of this, it ends up running 9 times. This is a concept a lot of people get confused with. I feel like I didn't explain that the best, but the point is this runs 3 times, right? Every single time this runs, what's inside of here is running. And since this for loop runs 3 times, whatever's inside of here ends up running 9 times because it's 3 times for 3 times. So you multiply them by each other and you get 9. Now you could keep going with multiple layers of for loops inside of each other, but this is how this works when we iterate through our board or a multi-dimensional array. Okay, now inside of here, what we need to do is print out the different symbols, but we want them all to be on the same line. So what we're actually going to do is create a string, and then once we finish creating that string, we're going to print it out. So what I'm going to do is say let, and we're going to say row string equal to an empty string. Then what we're going to do is the following. We are going to say row string, and we're going to say plus equals because we're just going to add a string to this, and we're going to add our row at index j. Now what this will do is add whatever element we have, so either it's a space or something like an x, it's going to add that to our string. However, we don't just want to add this, we actually want to add a little bit of spacing. So what we're going to say is the following. If, so we're going to put an if statement here, if j does not equal row.length minus 1. Then we're going to say the row string plus equals, and we're going to add a space and a pipe. And then we're going to add another space as well. Now, what this effectively is going to do is it's going to add a separator between the symbol that we just added and the next symbol that we'll add. Now, the reason why I've done this if statement here is I only want to add this separator if we're not on the last element. The idea here is that if I'm on this position, right, so the last column, I don't want to add a separator after it. I only want to add separators in between. So that's why I'm checking to make sure that I'm not in that last position when I add this separator. So what we're doing is creating a string, and the string will look something like this. Okay, that's what we're going to get. So whatever's in the row, maybe it's a space, it'll look like this. If it's an element, it will look like this. Okay, so that's the string we're going to create. So then once we create the string after this for loop, we can just simply log it. So we can console.log the row string, and then we can console.log a separator for the row. So we're going to do this. Okay, but same thing here. I only want to log this separator if I'm not on the last row, because I don't want to have a separator like this, right? I only want to have one in between the different rows. So same thing as before, but this time we're going to use the I variable because this keeps track of the row and this keeps track of the column. And we're going to say if I does not equal, and then this is going to be the length of the board. So board.length minus 1. The reason why I use this .length minus 1 is that's the last possible element that we have inside of our board. Now, the reason I do board.length minus 1 is that this will give me the last index that I have inside of my board or inside of the array that I'm looping through. So if in theory we made this larger in the future, then this code would still work. So it's better practice than writing, for example, 2, because if you do 2, then this only works when the board has 3 elements inside of it. Now, we know that's going to be the case, but here I like to use the .length minus 1 because that dynamically gives me access to the last element. Okay, so now let's use this print board function and see if this works. Maybe I made a mistake. Let's see. So rather than console.logging the board, I'm going to print the board, and we'll just pass the board that we want to print. So now I can go up here, and I can run, and we're going to say enter row, and let's go maybe 2, 1. And you see that we get our board actually looks pretty good. So now let's go maybe 3, 3, and you see that the O gets entered. Perfect. Now I'm just going to clean this up a little bit so it's a bit easier to read. To do that, I'm going to add a console.log, and we'll do that, I guess, after we print the board. So you'll make a move, it will then print the board. And I also just want to print the board one time and have a console.log before we start, just so you can see an empty board. You can make your move, then we'll print out the board, and then we'll add some space before the next person goes. Okay, another thing I want to do really quickly is I just want to add a few more of these. So I'm going to add one more dash just so that we get a little bit of a nicer formatted board. Okay, so let's run this again and make sure it looks a bit better. Okay, so you can see now we have a space, so it's a little bit easier to read. We can go 3, 3. Okay, that gets entered. 2, 1. Okay, 3, 2. You get the idea. Perfect. Okay, so that works nicely. And one more thing I'll add now is I'll just say whose turn it is. So I'm going to console.log an empty string, and then I'm going to say console.log. And actually, let's do that at the top of the program here. We'll say, maybe, how should we do this? We'll say it is the, and then turn, player's turn. So this will just print out whatever the turn is, whether it's X or O, so we know whose turn it is. And actually, we can just go turn, player's turn, like this, just so that it's not super long. Okay, so that is it in terms of printing the board and making a move. But obviously, we need to check if someone wins. So how do we know if someone wins? Well, we need to check all of the lines that potentially exist here. So we need to see if any of the rows are filled. We need to see if any of the columns are filled, and we need to check the 2 diagonals. Now, there's multiple ways that we can go about writing this, but I like to implement something that looks like this. So I'm going to write a function and kind of show you one way to do this. Again, there's multiple ways that we can do it. So I'm going to say function check win. Now, when we check the win, we're just going to take in the board. Now, inside of check win, what I'm going to do is write an array that contains all of the positions of lines that could potentially win. So you'll see what I mean here, but I'm going to make an array. I'm going to call this lines. Now, inside of this array, I'm going to have arrays, And inside of those arrays, I'm going to have more arrays just so I can kind of show you how this works. Now, what we'll start by checking is row 0. And what we're going to do is we're going to put the positions of all of the elements that would need to be the same in order for a user to win. So we're going to say lines is equal to, we have an array, and the first array inside of here is one line. And that array is going to be 0, 0, 0, 1, and 0, 2. Now what this is representing is these three positions, which is one line that could make you win. So hopefully you get the idea, but I'm going to write all of the lines that could allow you to win, and then I'm going to check all of these lines and see if they're all filled with the same thing, because if they are, that means you win. Okay, so we have this first line. That's row 0. Now let's write the second line. So for the second line, we're going to check row 1. So it's going to be the same thing, but now we're going to have row 1. Okay, so again, like 1, 0 is this, 1, 1 is this, 1, 2 is this. So it's the three positions that need to be the same in order for a win. We're going to call this row 1. Now you don't have to add the comment. I'm just trying to make it more clear for you. So we're going to go 2, 0, 2, 1, and we have 8 lines in total that we need to write out. Keep in mind, there's many ways to do this, but this is just one way that I want to show you because it's common in certain programs. So now that we do the rows, we're going to do the columns. So now we're just going to switch it a little bit. It's going to go 0, 0, and then we need to do this one. So we're going to have 1, 0, and then 2, 0. Okay, that's going to be column 0. Now we need to make sure that we have our commas, because if we don't have our commas, we're going to get an error. So let's add those. And now we are going to have the next one, which is going to be 1, 1, or sorry, 1, is it 1, 1? No, it's going to be 0, 1. And then it's going to be 1, 1. And then it's going to be 2, 1. I think that's correct. Yeah, because we're changing, or we're keeping the column the same, but the rows are being changed. Okay. Column 1 requires a little bit of thinking here to write all of these out. Next, this is going to be 0, 2, 1, 2, and 2, 2. Okay, and that's going to be our column 2. Now we need to do the diagonals. So for the first diagonal, we can go from up to down. So up to down will look like this: 0, 0, 1, 1, and 2, 2. Okay, so that's going to be, I guess, left to right, diagonal. Okay, I mean, I guess both of them you could say are left to right. Let's just go diagonal 1. Okay, and now let's add the other diagonal. So for the other diagonal, we're going to start here. So that's going to be at 0, 2, and then 1, 1, and then we're going to be in row 2, position 0. I think that makes sense. So yeah, that's 0, 2, 1, 1, 2, 0. Okay, and this will be diagonal 2. So now we have all of the lines that we could potentially win on. So I'm just going to take in one more parameter here, which is whatever the current turn is. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially check if they fulfill any of this line. So I'm going to say for, and this is going to be let line of lines. So I'm looping through each of the lines. Now for each line, I'm going to check all of the positions that we have, and I'm going to see if they're equal to the turn. So we're going to make a variable, and we're going to say let win equal true. I'm then going to say for, and we're going to go position, so let position of line. Now, what that's going to do is it's going to loop through all of these arrays that are inside of this array, which is the line that we're currently looking at. So again, kind of a nested for loop, right? The first for loop is looping through all of the lines, and the second for loop is looping through all of our positions. So now we need to get the position. So we're going to say const, and I'm going to do something you probably haven't seen before. I'm going to do row call is equal to pause. Now, what this will do is it will simply assign the first element to row and the second element to call. So this is kind of a shorthand you can use when you want to extract the elements from an array, because here we have an array with 2 elements, and we know that corresponds with the row and the column. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if the, and this is going to be line, or sorry, not line, if the board at the row column does not equal our turn, then we're going to say win equals false. And we're going to put this inside of a set of square brackets, or curly braces, sorry. And we're going to break out of this for loop. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, we're going to assume that we've fulfilled the current line. Then we're going to go and look through each position in the line. We're going to grab the row and the column, and we're going to check if the row and the column, so if the element that's in the board at that position is equal to the player's current turn. If it's not, that means that this line is not fulfilled. So we're going to say win is equal to false, and we're going to break out. Now what we can do here is we can say if win, and notice this is outside of this for loop, and here, if win, we can just return true, okay? Otherwise, we're going to return false. Now let's look at this return. The reason why I can do this is because if this win variable is still true after I checked the line, it means that I've fulfilled one of the lines because we didn't set it to false. So it means that all of these elements were correct. They were the player's turn. So we've fulfilled a line, we've completed a line, so we can just return true. Now, if it's not true, we just go and we check the next line. We just continue checking. Now, if we get to the end of this for loop and we've checked every single line and none of them are fulfilled, so win never is true, it always gets set to false, that means that we haven't yet won and we simply return false. So now this will check the win for the board and for a player's turn. So what I can do is call this after the player makes a move. So we can print the board, we can console.log, and then we can say const win equals check win. And then we can pass the board and we can pass the current turn. Now, if the player wins at this point, if win is true, then the game is over and we can print that out. So we're going to say if win, then we can say console.log, and we're going to say turn has won, and then we're going to break. Okay, so if they win, we just break out of the for loop. And that should actually be it. Let's kind of take a quick look at this, and we can run the code and test it out. So we have a make move function. We know how that works. We simply check if the move is valid, and we insert this into the board. We then have a print board where we're doing some, I wouldn't say fancy, but at least some more complex stuff to create this row string, and then print out a string that looks nice for the board. And then we have our check win function, which checks all of the lines and sees if all of the values in the line is equal to the player's turn. If that's the case, they won. Now, what we're doing is we're checking if we win after every single move. So after we make the move, we check if the player, when they insert in that position, has won. If they won, then we can go ahead and break. Okay, the only thing we're not handling is a tie, but we'll do that in 1 second. So let's go to project 4 and let's try to win. So it's the X player's turn. Let's go in the middle, so 2-2. Okay, O player's turn. Let's go maybe in the top corner, so 1-1. Okay, for X, let's go in maybe 1-2. Okay, for O, I'm not going to block because I want to win, so let's go in maybe row 2, column 1. Okay, and then let's go in, what is this, 3 and 2. And there we go, it says X has won because we fulfilled this line. Now we could test all of the lines if we want to, but for now I'm just going to leave it as is because we know that this is working and I just know that the code is going to work properly. But really, if you're writing this on your own, you should test all of the lines to make sure it works. Now the only thing we haven't handled is a tie. So let's see what happens if we tie. So let's go 1-1. Let's go 2-2. Let's go, what do we want to do here? Maybe 1-3. Let's go in the middle. So this is going to be 1-2. Why is this difficult to figure out? Okay, I need to block that position. So it's going to be 3-2. Then let's go down here. So we're going to go into 1. Okay, we need to block that. So let's go into 3. Okay, we need to block now. So we're going to go in 3-3. And then we're going to go in 3-1. Okay, so at this point we tied, so we didn't get any player winning. So what I can do if I want to show that is I can just say console.log tie game. Okay, now the reason why tie game works here is because if we get to the end of 9 turns and we haven't yet won, then we must have tied, right? That's just the logic. So we must have tied, so we can just print tie game if we exit the while loop. However, actually, I need to think about something here. We only want to do this if the turn count was equal to 9. So we're going to say if the turn count is equal to 9, then we can print out the tie game. And the reason why we'll do that is because we only want to show tie game if all 9 turns were completed and no one won. And actually that makes me think this might not necessarily work because what's going to happen is someone could win on the 9th turn. So this is me kind of thinking through and, making some mistakes. But what I can do is make a variable. I can say, let's do it up here, let 1 like this. And what we'll do is just change this to say win, let's make this win. So now I have this variable win, which I've defined, and we can just make this equal to false to start. Okay, so we're going to say currently no one's won. Now we're going to keep updating this variable, and eventually at some point, if someone wins, it will become equal to true. Notice I removed the const because now I'm using this one here. Then we say, well, if someone's won, let's print this out. Otherwise, we'll go down here. Then we say if someone's won, okay, go ahead and print this out and then break. And then down here, I can just say if not win, like that. So if we haven't won, so if 1 is still equal to false, once we get out of this loop, then we can just log tie game. Okay, so that should work for us. So let's see if this works for the tie game. So let's go 1-1, let's go 2-1, let's go 3-1. Okay, let's go 2-2. We need to block here, so it's going to be 2-3. Okay, let's go. I think I've set it up so that I win no matter what. Maybe. Whose player is it? Okay, let's go 1-3. All right, let's go with 3-2. Okay, we need to block, so 3-3. And then we're going to go 1-2. Okay, and then it says tie game. Perfect. So that is working. All right, so there we go. I'm confident that this project is good. Again, all of this code will be available from the link in the description. That is project number 4. Hopefully you found this helpful. And now let's move on to the next one. So now we're moving on to project number 5, which is a random quiz generator. What we're going to do is have a large bank of quiz questions, which we're going to store in a file. Specifically, we're going to use something called JSON, which I'll show you in a second. Now, what we'll do is we'll randomly select a bunch of questions from that file and then display them. Then what we'll do is we'll present them to the user and we'll time how long it takes for the user to answer all of the questions, and we'll give them their score to see how many they got correct. So let's start building this out. And the first thing I want to do is get a bunch of quiz questions. Now, what we're going to do is make a new file. And this file is going to be questions.json. Now, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And inside of here, we can write an object pretty much just like we did in JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is paste in a bunch of questions here, and I'll show you what the format looks like and how you can do the same. So you can see I have this large file here, and notice that what I've done is I've made a key called questions. Now, when we're using JSON rather than in JavaScript, we need to have double quotation marks around all of our property values. So we have questions, this is a property, and then what I have is a big list or an array, and inside of the array, I have a bunch of objects. Now, these objects have the question, so you can see the question is here. It then has different options, so these are the kind of multiple choice answers, or I guess options or choices. And then you have the answer, which in this case here for this question is Jupiter. And I have a bunch of questions. If you want these questions, you can simply download them from the link in the description. You can go to GitHub and find this file, or you can use something like ChatGPT to generate this sample questions bank. Now that's exactly what I've done. I just went to ChatGPT, I gave it something that looked like this, and I said, hey, generate a bunch of questions in this format that I could save in a JSON file. It then gave me this. So again, JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. Works the exact same as in JavaScript, except you need double quotation marks on all of your property values. You can't use single quotes, it needs to be double quotes. So that's what I've done. I have my opening brace, my closing brace, I have a key, which is questions, associated with an array. And then in the array, I have a bunch of questions that follow this format. So we're going to start with that, and I'm going to show you how we can load this content into our project so that we can store all of the questions here, and then we just need to change this file if we want to add new questions. Okay, so let's go over to project 5. Now I've made this new file, and what we're going to do here is start by kind of importing prompt sync. So we're going to say that's Python. We're going to say const prompt is equal to require, and let's go here, and this is going to be prompt-sync, and then we're going to call this. Then we're going to import something known as the file system. So we're going to say const fs, standing for file system, is equal to require, and we're going to bring in fs. Now this allows us to actually load in files. So I'm going to show you how we do that. So we're going to make a function called load questions. Now what we're going to do inside of here is we're going to use a kind of new block that we haven't seen yet, which is a try except block or a try catch block. So we're going to say try and then catch, and I'm going to discuss what this does. So the try catch here is something that we can use to attempt to run a block of code, and if it fails, we can handle any exception that occurs. So what we're going to do is attempt to load a file, but if an error happens when we're loading that file, rather than crashing our program and showing an error message, we can handle that error. So what we can do is any code we want to attempt, and if we're not sure if it's going to work or not, we put it inside of this try block. Then we can have this catch block afterwards, and this catch block will be triggered only if an error occurs. So if an error happens in here, then the error will be handled here inside of the catch, and we can do something to take care of it. Now this will actually be whatever the error is that occurred, so we can check the error, look for something specific, or we could just print it out. So for example, I could say console, let me do this, if I can find the O, console.log, error occurred, loading file, and then I can simply print out E like this, and that's just going to show me what the error message is, but it's not going to crash my program. Okay, then from here, I'm just going to return an empty array, because if we couldn't load the questions, we're just going to return an empty array. So we have this try catch. Okay, again, the catch is kind of what happens if something goes wrong inside of the try, and inside of the try now, what we'll do is we'll attempt to load our file. So we're going to say const data is equal to fs.read file sync. Okay, this is going to read in a file, and what we can do is say questions.json, and then we can specify the encoding format, which is UTF-8. Don't worry too much about this, but this is just the essentially way that this file is encoded so that JavaScript knows how to read it in. Okay, so we put the name of the file, and it's important that this file is in the same directory where our project file is. So for example, if this was on our desktop or something, not inside of the same directory, we wouldn't be able to read it. Well, we could, but we'd have to change this code. So we need to have it in the same directory. So we have project 5, and then questions.json is in that same directory or folder, which is why we're able to read it. Okay, so we're going to attempt to read it, but this could potentially break. Like something could go wrong here if the file doesn't exist or it's corrupted, and that's why we have the catch statement so we can handle an error that occurs. Okay, then we're going to say const questions is equal to, and this is going to be json.parse, and we're going to parse the data and attempt to grab the questions. Now, like I said, this is JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So what we need to do is we need to take this JSON file and convert this into a JavaScript object. So that's exactly what this does. It takes what is a string, which is our data when we read the file, and then it uses json.parse to convert this to a JavaScript object. Now that it's a JavaScript object, I can use it just like any other JavaScript object, and I can access this questions property, which gives me the array containing all of my questions. Then I can simply go here and return questions. Okay, perfect. So that's how I load my questions. So now we're going to test this out by saying const questions is equal to load questions, and we're going to go console.log and then questions like that. Okay, so now let's test our code and make sure this works. So we're going to say node, and then this is project5.js, and you can see that it prints out all of my different questions. Amazing. Now the next thing that I want to do is I want to randomize the order of my questions. So rather than having them in the same order, I want to randomly select a few of them. So what we're going to do is make a function called getRandomQuestions. Okay, now what this is going to take in is our questions and the num of questions that we want. Okay, number of questions, sorry. So maybe we're going to get 3 questions, 5 questions, 7 questions, 10 questions, doesn't matter, but we want to randomly collect a certain amount of them. Okay, so in order to do this, the first thing we need to check is to make sure the number of questions passed is not greater than the number of questions that we have. So we're going to say if the num questions is greater than questions.length, then what we're going to do is say the number of questions is equal to questions.length. Okay, the reason why we're doing this is that if you try to get more questions than we have, well, we don't have that many, so we just need to set this equal to however many questions we actually do have. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to shuffle this array, and shuffling the array, what that will do is essentially randomize the order. Now to do that, we're going to say const, and this is shuffled, is going to be equal to our questions dot, and this is going to be sort. Now inside of sort, I'm going to pass something that we haven't yet seen, which is called an arrow function. Now an arrow function looks like this. We have a set of parentheses, we have an arrow, so an equal sign and then a greater than sign, and then we have a set of curly braces. Now the curly braces is the body of the function, so like this is here, like, you know, what we want to do this is inside of the curly braces, and the set of parentheses here is where we accept our different parameters. So again, it's literally the exact same thing as writing a function like this. There's a few minor differences, but it's kind of a nice way to embed a function when we need to pass that as an argument to a function. I know that's a little bit weird and kind of some jargon that I threw out there, but the way that dot sort works is it takes a function that defines how we're going to sort the array. Okay, so we say questions.sort, and then we pass what's known as a sorting function. So for the sorting function, what we take is, for the sorting function, what we can do is simply say return 0.5, and then this is going to be minus math.random. Now, this involves understanding how sort works. So sort in JavaScript is a bit different than in other languages. Typically, what you accept in sort is two parameters, a parameter A and a parameter B. Now, the way that this works is it will compare different values in the array, and it will store them as A and B in this function. So pretty much what will happen is if we have like a big array and we have, you know, A, B, C, D, etc., what will happen is A will get compared to B, B will get compared to C, C will get compared to D, and all of the elements will get compared against each other in some order. I don't want to explain exactly how the sorting algorithm works, but the idea is that we're going to write how we should compare these elements against each other. So A and B are two elements that we're comparing. Now, if we return a positive number from this function, that means that A is greater than B. If we return a negative number, that means that B is greater than A. And if we return 0, it means that they're the same. I know it seems a little bit weird, but the sort will take that positive, negative, or 0 and use that to sort the array in ascending order. We can also have it sort in descending order based on how we write this. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going to return randomly a positive or a negative number. So I don't need to accept A or B because I'm not actually going to use them. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to take 0.5 and I'm going to subtract that from math.random. Now math.random is going to be equal to a number between 0 and 1. So if the number is greater than 0.5, I'm going to get a negative number. If it's less than 0.5, I'm going to get a positive number. Now what this effectively will do for me is randomly sort the values because I don't care about what the values actually are. For every single value, I simply return a random number that's positive or negative. So I understand it's a little bit confusing, but this is a simple way to do like a randomized sort. Again, I don't want to get too far into the sort algorithm and arrow functions and some more complex stuff, but it is somewhat required to understand what's going on. Anyways, the point is this is shuffling and sorting the array for us. So now that we have the sorted array, what we want to do is just take however many number of questions from that array. So what we can do is say return, and then we're going to say shuffled, and we're going to say dot slice, which is a new method we haven't seen, and we're going to slice from 0 to the number of questions. Now the way the dot slice works is it gives us a slice or a portion of the array. It starts at this index and it goes to this index but does not include it. So if I slice 0 to, for example, 3, that gives me the first 3 elements, index 0, index 1, and index 2. Okay, if I sliced from like 2 to the number of questions, then that gives me index 2, and then whatever the number of question is. So it goes like 2, 3. If the number of questions was 4, then it would just return index 2 and index 3. So it does not include the number of questions index, but when we go 0 to number of questions, that effectively gives us the first number of questions element in the array. Let me do a better example because I know it's a bit confusing. Let's say that we do a slice of 0 to 2 on this. If we do that, we get 1 and 2. If we do a slice of 1 to 4, then we're going to get index 1 2, and 3, and we're going to stop at but not include 4. Okay, so that's how the slicing works. So let's go back to what we had, which is 0 and number of questions. So that gives us the number of questions from our randomized array. Okay, so now let's test this out. So we're going to say const random questions is equal to, and this is going to be get random questions, and then we're going to pass the questions, and let's just pass maybe 4. And then we can console.log the random questions. Okay, so let's test this. And you see that we get 1, 2, 3, 4 random questions. If we change this to just be maybe 2, and we run this now, you'll see that we just get 2 random questions. And if we keep running this, you'll see we get different questions because it's randomized. Okay, amazing. So that is that. We now have the questions. We have the random questions, but we need a way to display the questions and see if the user got them correct. So let's write a function that asks the user a question. We're going to say function ask question, and we're going to take in a question. Okay, now what we're going to do is display the question and then display the different options for the question and ask the user to enter a valid option. So we're going to say console.log, and what we'll do is say question dot question. Okay, because again, we have each question, which is one of these objects, and then we have the question, which is some text. So we're going to display that question, and then we're going to display the options. So we're going to say for, and we're going to go with let option of question dot options. Okay, now actually we're not going to do that because I need to know the number so that we can have the index of each question. So I'm going to say for let I equal 0, I is less than question dot options, and then I plus plus. We're going to say const option is equal to question dot options at index I, and then we're going to print out the index and then the option so that we can see we have, option 1, option 2, option 3, etc. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to show you something new that we haven't yet seen. So I'm going to say console.log, and this time I'm going to use my backticks. So rather than using the single quotes or the double quotes, I'm using backticks, which are on the same key as the tilde, typically in the top left-hand side of your keyboard underneath the escape key. Now, when we use these backticks, it allows us to embed variables inside of a string. So what I can do is put a $sign and put a set of curly braces. When I do this, this denotes that I'm going to put a variable directly inside of here. So this means I don't need to use kind of the plus sign notation or string concatenation. I can instead directly embed variables inside of the string. So I'm going to say I plus 1, and I'm adding 1 because I don't want to show option 0. I want to start by listing option 1. I'm then going to do a dot, and then I'm going to embed another variable, and this is going to be the option. Okay, so I get the option, and then I have the index associated with that option. I'm just adding 1 to it, and I'm going to list it and display that out. Okay, so before we go any further, let's just test this. We're going to say const ask, or sorry, not const, we're going to say ask question. Okay, and we're going to pass random questions at index 0 just to see if this works properly. Okay, so let's go here and run, and it says, what is the hardest natural substance on Earth? Okay, and what is the issue here? Question.options. For some reason, this didn't actually run. That's weird to me. So maybe we call this something else. Options, and we have question.options. Okay, so what could be the issue here? Let's try to debug this together. So we have random questions 0. We ask the question by printing out console.log question.question. And then we say let I equal 0. I is less than question.options, I plus plus. We then get the option and we print it. But for some reason, this for loop's not running because it's not showing us any options. Let's run this one more time. And yeah, same thing, we're getting this issue here. So I is less than question.options. Aha, that's because we need to add dot length. So I forgot to add the dot length. So we're comparing I to question.options, which is kind of weird, and that didn't work. So if we add the length, then we get the number of options that we have, and that should fix the problem. So let's try this now. And there you go. We can see now that we get the question, and we can ask multiple questions. Perfect. So now let's try to get the user's answer. So we're going to get some input. So we're going to say const, and we'll say choice is equal to prompt, and we'll say enter the number maybe. Okay, so we're going to ask the user to enter the number, and we're just going to check if it's equal to the correct option. So the correct option is going to be found in the answer. So we need to essentially take whatever the user's index is that they inputted, check what choice it was, and then compare that to the answer. So we're going to say const choice value is equal to, and we need to first parse this as an int. Okay, so we're going to parse this as an int, and then we're going to say that this is going to be question dot options, and then we're going to find the choice minus 1. Okay, so question dot options and then choice minus 1. That looks good. And then we need to compare that to the correct answer. So we're going to say const correct is equal to the choice value. And this is going to be equal to the question dot answer. Okay. So there's a few more things that we need to add, but for now, if the user gives us a valid number, so 1 through 4, what we do is convert that to an int, and then we take whatever the number is that they give us, so whether it's 4, 3, whatever, and we subtract 1 to change the choice that they selected to the correct corresponding index. Because since we're adding 1 here, we need to subtract 1 when the user types in a value. Then we actually get whatever that option is, so the value of it, and we compare that to the correct answer. Okay, the only thing we need to add here is we need to make sure they do give us a valid number, because if they don't, then this line will give us an issue. So what we're going to do is the following. We're going to say if is nan choice, or choice is less than 1, or choice is greater than, and this will be the question. So let's do this. If we can type this correctly, dot options dot length, then that means that this was invalid. So we are going to say console.log. It will say invalid, incorrect choice. And then we are going to return false. So my idea is from this function, we'll return false if the user got the answer wrong and true if they got it correct. So now what I can do is rather than having just correct here, I can simply return this expression, which will either be true or false, depending on if they get it right or wrong. And then down here, what I can do is keep track of the number of correct answers. Okay, so now we've asked the question, and I'm just going to say const correct is equal to this. And I'm going to say console.log correct, just so we can see if they got it right or wrong. Okay, so we're printing out the question, we're printing out the options, we're converting the user's choice to a number, we're making sure that number is valid so that it's within the bounds of the choices and it's not a number. And if it's wrong, we're just going to say, okay, it's invalid choice and return false. Otherwise, we're going to check if it's correct. So we're going to get the choice value, compare that to the answer. If it's correct, we return true. If it's false, or if it's incorrect, we return false. Okay, so let's run this now and let's enter the year. I think it's 1912 and we get false. Okay, so I guess it was in 1912. Let's go. Oh, I entered 1912 when I needed to enter the correct choice. What does it say? Which planet is close to the sun? I don't know this. Let's go with 2. Okay, false. Let's try to get one correct. Which is the largest planet? Jupiter, right? True. Okay, and then we got that one correct. Great. You're going to see I'm quite bad at these quiz questions, but that's okay. All right, so this is working. We have our 3 functions. We load the question, we get random questions, and then we ask the question. And we just tested that out down here with a few lines of code. Now what we want to do is we want to actually kind of play the game. So we need like a while loop that's going to go through and run through all of our questions. So let's do that. Let's get rid of these lines. And let's remove the number here, and let's actually start by asking the user to enter a number of questions. So we're going to say const, and we'll say num questions is equal to a prompt, and we'll say enter the number of questions. Okay, now we're just going to assume that they give us valid input here. Okay, so we're going to say parse int, and then what we're going to do is pass that to our random questions. Now we could validate this if we want, but I'm not going to do that because I've showed you how to do that many times now. Okay, so we have random questions now generated based on what the user gives us. Now what I want to do is track how many they get correct. So I'm going to say let correct equal 0. What I also want to do is track how long it takes them to answer this. So I'm going to start a timer. Now to start a timer, I'm going to say const start time is equal to, and I'm going to grab the current date. To do that, I can say date dot now. Now this is going to give me the current time, and what I can do is simply check when they finish and subtract it from this, and it will give me the number of seconds that have elapsed. Okay, so we have that, we have the start time, we have the number of correct, and now we need to loop through all of their questions. So we're going to say for, and we'll say let question of random questions, because we're going to loop through all of the questions that they have, and we're going to start asking it to them. So we're going to say correct, or const is correct, is equal to, and then this is going to be ask question, and then we'll pass the question. Okay, then we're going to say if is correct, then what we will do is we'll say correct plus plus. So if they got this question correct, add 1 to the number of correct questions. Then at the bottom here, we're going to calculate the time. So we're going to say const finish time is equal to, or we can say, I guess, total time is equal to the date dot now, which will be greater than the start date minus the start time. So what this will do is take the current time and subtract that from when we started, and then that will give us the total amount of time elapsed. So now we can say console.log, and we can say correct colon, and then show the correct count. We could say console.log time, and we can show the total time. And then if we want, we can show maybe their average. So we can say console.log, maybe score, and then we can show a percent. So if we want to show a percent, what we can do is we can take the correct, we can divide that by the number of questions, and then we can multiply that by 100. Okay, so let's do this. And then let's take all of this and let's round it so that we get a nice even value. So we'll say math.round like that. And we'll just round this to 2 decimal places. So I know this looks weird, but what I have is correct over number of questions. We're taking that and multiplying it by 100. We're rounding that as the first argument to math.round. And then we're rounding this to 2 decimal places. I believe that's how round works. Actually, no, sorry, I need to remove this. That's how it works in Python, but we just take this number and we'll round it. And then we can add a percent sign. So if we want to add a percent sign, we can just say plus the string percent, and that should work. Okay, there's probably some things that I'm missing here, but I think that's okay for now. And let's just do something and add a console.log here, just so there's a bit of space when we ask the question. Okay, so all I did here is write these lines of code. We're tracking how many are correct. We're tracking the start time. We're looping through all of the random questions that we have. For each question, we're going to ask it and check if it's correct. We're then going to place like kind of a separator so that we can separate the questions, and we are going to check if it's correct and then increment the correct variable. Okay, so let's try this. Enter number of questions. Let's go with 4. Which planet is closest to the sun? I don't know if, did we get this one correct? What did I put? Mercury. Okay, in which year did the Titanic sink? Let's go 2. What is the hardest natural substance? Diamonds. Who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird? I have no idea who wrote this. Let's go 4. And it says we got 3 correct. The time was this, which is in milliseconds. So I'm going to show you how we convert that to seconds. And we scored 75%. Cool. Okay, so let's convert this, which is in milliseconds, to be seconds. It should be 18.3 seconds. To do that, we can divide it by 1,000. So we can take the total time and divide it by 1,000. And same thing, we can round this. So we can say math.round the total time over 1,000. And let's run this again. Okay, let's just go 2 questions this time. What is the chemical symbol for O? Pretty sure that's oxygen. The planet closest to the sun, did we get that right? I don't know. Let's go Mercury. And we got 2 correct. The time was 9 and we scored 100%. Now we might just want to put seconds. So what we can do is first, let's remove these spaces so that it doesn't look weird. And let's just go plus and S. So if we do plus S here, that'll just represent seconds. Let's run this one more time. Okay, to what is the capital of Canada? Ottawa. I lived in Canada, so I know that. What year did the Titanic sink? 1912. Correct. 2 times 7 seconds and score 100%. Okay, there we go. That is our random quiz generator. So with that said, guys, that is going to wrap up this video. All of this code will be available from the link in the description in case you want to copy any of it or refer to it. And I sincerely hope that this video was helpful and taught you quite a bit about JavaScript. Obviously, there is a lot more to learn, but this is a really good start. And hopefully you were able to see how to apply all of this directly into a project rather than just learning all of the theory and immediately forgetting it. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one.